Good evening. I'll call to order this April 23rd, 2024 Fairfield Plan and Zoning Commission meeting. Start with our meeting minutes from April 9th. I have a motion. Mr. Harrison,
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes from the last meeting.
motion to adopt, motion approved. Is there a second? Second, Commissioner Corsillo. Commissioner Forty up to speed?
Yes.
That gives us 7, right? Okay. Commissioner Harrison,
They look good. Nothing to change. No edits. Thank you.
Commissioner Corsillo.
Nothing else from me.
Any comments or questions from the commission? Let's do a vote. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Or was it there?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should have asked you. Okay, well, 6 and then you were abstain, I guess. Okay. Just make it 6-0-1 then. Motion approved, passes. Next item is 277-301 Berkeley Road, proposed settlement of litigation between the Town Plan and Zoning Commission, Berkeley Road LLC, whereby the Town Plan and Zoning Commission will consider stipulating to approving the zoning compliance application for 40-unit residential development pursuant to section 830G of the Connecticut General Statutes. Such settlement is subject to court approval. Commissioner Collins is not here, so Commissioner Bukowski is sitting in, correct?
Yes, because Mr. Ford is recused.
Still recused himself, yes. So let me just go, right now, the current motion is to approve a settlement for the settlement for 40-unit residential development pursuant to 830G of the Connecticut General Statutes. We had a long discussion our first time out, and the public has certainly weighed in their respect. I'll start off the conversation if you don't mind.
I just have a question, point of order. I think from the March 26 minutes, it said it's a rescission. I think you said settlement. I know maybe semantics to some, but we could just have that.
I have.
That-
It's the, Mr. Chairman, I corrected the revised motion was made to authorize the town attorney to enter into a stipulation to authorize approval. The original 40-unit development is noted on the, that was from the March 26th.
Oh, okay, I think I read them differently. Okay.
There was a motion there was some discussion. The original motion was to rescind, and then after following discussion, the motion was restated.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Sorry.
As I said, the motion on the table, which was made in order for discussion and to get the process moving, was to approve a settlement for 40 units. I think I was pretty clear the first time when my position was that the initial denial was improper for a variety of reasons. That the settlement was the best course of action. After hearing the public and going through it, I'm persuaded to let the appeal go forward. I still believe that the denial was improper for everything was said. I don't think the public has necessarily swayed my opinion that the denial was improper. But I have been persuaded that considering where the appeal is and the public's desire to have the appeal go forward, I am persuaded to let that go forward, which would mean in this case, I would not be supporting the motion as it currently stands. Now that could change if it's withdrawn or amended, but as I said, considering the public and where they are, not change my position on that it was an improper denial to begin with, but I have changed my position that in supporting this current motion. So hopefully that kicks things off. Does anybody open this up to the commission? Commissioner Levy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, I seconded the motion that's before us. And in the course of the public hearing, my position as expressed at the original hearing was quoted at length by Commissioner Francis. And at the time of the initial hearing, I voiced my opinion that I did not feel that there was enough in the record to support a denial of an 830G, despite the reservations about how horrendous this project is and the difficulties and the hardship that it imposes on the neighborhood in terms of parking and so forth. But I did not feel that the issue of parking and density were sufficient for an outright denial. And at that point, I suggested, as was quoted, a reasonable accommodation which might address the density issue and some of the issues, which would be to reduce the size of the project by 1 floor as a possible reasonable accommodation. Unfortunately, the motion that was then submitted and then approved by this commission was for an outright denial. So the public should understand that as a result of that, the way it was presented, the opportunity, which we did have at that point to consider various alternatives, whether it be decrease in the size of the project, whether it be having sidewalks along with our, complete street plan, or perhaps doing something in terms of bump outs, which could be done to deal with any parking issues. The opportunity to brainstorm about that was lost. And it went through as a straight denial. And I felt then, and I still feel, there's not enough there to support, a denial of the 830G. That what should have been done would have been further discussions about approving it subject to reasonable changes. That ship that's flown. It's not here. The matter came back to the commission without going into the details of the executive session, but there were discussions about the possibility of settling the matter. And those discussions were fully had, various proposals were considered, but the final proposal as submitted did not provide for a full 30% of affordable housing. And since that time, while perhaps I might have been able to shut my eyes and stomach possibility along those lines, March 6th, we got a decision from Judge Radcliffe in the matter of Mayor versus the ZBA at the town of Fairfield. And he pointed out in that case that the public policy favoring the resolution of legal disputes through negotiation and settlement arrived at by interested parties cannot justify subverting the municipal zoning process to confer special rights and a special status on the applicants there. And while again, it would still be determined whether or not there might be special circumstances where that could happen, based on that decision, it swayed me to the point where considering a settlement at less than the full 30%, even with a reduction in the size of the project, it was just not, I didn't feel that we were authorized to do that. And therefore, the motion came before us to simply stipulate to the approval. And whether you call it a rescission or a stipulation, I think the intent is properly noticed. So this commission does have authority by a majority vote when the matter is properly noticed to rescind, or in this case, stipulate to the original. Be that as it may, I too listened intently to the concerns of the neighbors. And it's very clear from what I heard that the people of Berkeley Road would like this matter resolved by a judge. That's very clear. I think I only heard one, I think it was attorney Karen McCormick, who suggested that we might ultimately consider again a reasonable accommodation, but I don't see how we can do that at this point based on that record. Not unless there was a stipulation for a reduction in size at the full 30%. That a judge might approve because it would not result in any special treatment or special status to this particular developer. Anybody else coming in here would be allowed, 6 units. They certainly wouldn't be allowed 30 units at 20%, maybe 30 units at 30%. That would be an 830G. So short of that. So at this point, having listened to the neighbors, and with a hope that, one thing I know from my 46 years of litigation, you never know what a judge is going to do. I would often advise my clients as to what I thought, but nobody knows until the judge rules. In this particular case, I have a strong sense of what I anticipate, but there's also the chance that a judge may look at this, may look at the concerns raised in the brief about the parking situation and the density, and a judge may send it back to us, as they did with Bronson Road, to consider a reasonable accommodation to address those issues. So in the unlikely event, or maybe in the hopeful event that whatever judge is hearing this case will consider remanding it back to us on that basis, I will be supporting just letting the matter go through the litigation process.
Thank you, Commissioner Levy. Commissioner Braun.
I actually was going to recommend settlement because I did not believe we had enough commissioners to recommend it going back to court. I believe the only two options we have are continuing in court or settling. I do feel that the applicant has given us a good faith proposal on a compromise. And I also believe legally we would be able to accept it. And one of us should probably do the research on that. But I don't know that I haven't looked at that case, but I don't know if that would rule over here because I think that one must have had to do with zoning regulations. And this has to do with an interpretation of 8-30G, where basically the price the developer pays to get the density they want is to have 30%. I'm not sure that mandate extends to the town in a settlement, but be that as it may, I believe there are only two options, and rescission was never a viable option for a whole host of reasons. First of all, it's, as one of the neighbors pointed out, it's on its way to a final hearing at some point in the near future. And one of the neighbors pointed out, even the first selectman said, why would you give up when, there's a chance you could win in the court case? I do recognize that almost 3/4 of all court cases go against us. There was a recent article in the CT Insider. I finally got beyond the paywall and read that most of them don't go our way. Okay, so that's a tough one because the burden of proof shifts from the applicant to the commission. And even if we have significant evidence of harm, which I believe we do, then you have to determine if a reasonable accommodation would solve that. And we said it didn't. And also that harm is greater than the need for affordable housing, which is kind of a subjective standard. I want to point out just a few things about 8-30G. The burden does shift to the applicant, and that's, I believe, why most cases don't go the way the town goes. I think it's almost 3/4 when the town denies something. I want to push back a little bit. I've heard a few people say that, we haven't done enough and therefore it's landing at your doorstep. There are no sacrificed neighborhoods, okay? We determined this case based on these facts and this situation. We don't consider something that could happen in the future and what we didn't do in the past. We have to determine it based on what's before us. But also, I don't think the town is to blame for not having become exempt from this law. Our own economic development director who tracks affordable housing in our town, and we're very close to getting a moratorium, which is only a temporary reprieve for 4 years. But he pointed out we'll never get to 10% in our lifetime, most likely, and most towns won't. And as I pointed out last time, I think 83% of all the towns in the state have never gotten to 10%, and they didn't have 10% 35 years ago when this was passed, for a whole host of reasons beyond the scope of what I can say today. But there's a variety of reasons, not our fault. So we're not exempt. We're not going to be exempt. We're going to be bound by this for the indefinite future, except for the several years when we get our moratorium. I am cognizant of the evidence that have been presented by the neighbors and by the applicant. And I feel that we had adequate evidence in the record. It's been repeated to us a few times. The narrow roads, the fact that it gets narrower right here, the fact that consistently cars are parked. It's a working class neighborhood, trucks are parked. Some people don't even have driveways. That is, to me, that rises to the level of having to consider the real life facts on the ground, which is you must consider the parked cars to adequately protect public safety. And that's what we did. We have an expert drawing which shows there's not adequate sightline. I believe that's adequate evidence. We have people saying that they've been asking the town to do safety studies. An RTM representative said that for 7 years. I actually had a state representative mention to me at Earth Day over the weekend that this is a terrible, terrible thing for this neighborhood. It's just too big. It's too big for this neighborhood. So I was willing to accept the 30 unit scale back. I felt that was reasonable, and I appreciate the offer that was being made. But I also feel that this could go to court, and let's let the judge decide. And in the course of that, as Commissioner Levy pointed out, the judge may well come back and say, come back and figure this out. And whether or not we have to keep the 30%, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't believe it should be mandated when a developer scales it back in order to accommodate safety concerns that they have to maintain the 30%. I believe a settlement or an accommodation should not require that, or things would not settle. It would be very difficult. So based on the comments I've heard by the chairman and Commissioner Levy, I will support continuing with the court case, which I believe will be done in a few months, and we'll see where the chips fall.
Mr. Harrison.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Chairman Noonan, Commissioner Levy, and Commissioner Braun for your very thoughtful comments and for really, I think, taking this to heart and listening to the people. I do want to thank everyone who's been here for your patience, for your professionalism on both sides. I think to the neighbors, you've always provided a lot of helpful information to us and tactful insight for me on the safety implications of this project. I don't think this was ever about 830G or predatory developers or anything like that. I think it was about the substance and the impact of public safety, and that's what we can judge in 830G on. Anyone that casts you otherwise is simply wrong. So I think that's important to state. And to Commissioner Braun's point, I don't think we should ever act out of fear or fear that another neighborhood can 830G in the future or favor one neighborhood or the other. That's not what we do here. I would be happy to support letting a judge decide. I was always in favor of settling. I thought Attorney Fallon put forth a good faith settlement. I would be happy to go along with the chairman and see where it goes. I don't think we should always be afraid of litigation. We're halfway there. Let's see what happens.
Thank you.
As well.
Go ahead.
Going down the line. So, yeah, I mean, look, I have no doubt that Berkeley Road today is unsafe for pedestrians. So I certainly empathize with everyone who's raised concerns with the current conditions, conditions that I think this town for years has failed to address. So I thank and commend the community for bringing what I think is needed attention to that fact, and strongly encourage the our new Complete Streets coordinator to prioritize Berkeley Road in developing its initial Complete Streets plan. With regard to a development such as this, I mean, the fact is that proving that conditions today are unsafe isn't enough to meet the burden required. And it's still my view the evidence in the record was not sufficient to deny the application. I also think the commission has an obligation to prove that the public interest cannot be protected through the kinds of reasonable accommodations Commissioner Levy spoke to, such as restricting parking in front of the property to address sightline concerns. So to me, this isn't a question of whether or not the denial of the application should be overturned, but a question of whether it should be overturned by this commission. And fortunately, in the case of 830G, the statute provides an appeal procedure, which, again, as Commissioner Levy suggested, allows for the possibility that a judge will take corrective action to address sightline concerns and some of the other concerns that have been raised by revising, modifying, or remanding the application, the decision rather. So I continue to oppose a settlement in terms of a smaller project, the kind of smaller project that the applicant has offered. But I believe that despite the fact that I am the one who put the motion on the table, that allowing this to play out could in fact result in a better project than we would get by simply rescinding if the judge was to revise, modify, or remand the application. So it seems to me that it would be proper to allow that procedure to play out here.
Commissioner Randolph?
To all the neighbors, thank you very much for your very articulate and clear feedback. It really made me proud to be a citizen of this town, hearing how clearly you presented your evidence and your concerns, and the fact that you showed up and you cared. Unfortunately, the evidence presented was anecdotal. In order to demonstrate that there's safety issues, it needs to be more than feelings and impressions. It's a starting point, but the evidence presented or to basically deny this wasn't presented by qualified professionals. But the evidence that was done by the qualified professionals was incomplete. It looked at sightlines, parking, which don't rise to the level of a safety concern, but pedestrian safety does. And none of the analysis included pedestrian safety. And the fact that that was omitted and not thoroughly evaluated by a qualified traffic engineer gives me great concern. It's a walker's neighborhood. School children walk in that neighborhood, and it is a dangerous neighborhood now to walk in. And nothing, the construction of a large multifamily building would likely exacerbate that condition, but that wasn't presented. So I think the safety analysis was incomplete, despite the fact that no issues were clearly identified, but the analysis was incomplete. So I think a comment was made that the town isn't to blame. The town is to blame. We haven't done enough, and it's not necessarily this commission. The past, I think we have a very good commission now who works in an aligned fashion, and we're trying to solve some of these problems so they don't arise again, but the town is to blame. We haven't provided enough affordable housing in this town, and we're now in a position where these laws, well-intended laws to provide affordable housing are being imposed upon this neighborhood, which is unfortunate, but it's where we are and it's the law. But I think the settlement that was presented, there were so many different settlements. I don't think any of them were reasonable. I would not accept them, and I'm supportive of continuing with the case and allowing the judge to decide, because there is a chance that they will rule in favor of rejecting this. So again, I thank all the neighbors, and we, the town, have to do better. And that's what we hope to do.
Thank you. Commissioner Prokowski, go ahead.
Thank you. So like some of my fellow commissioners, I did come to a point where I was willing to accept the 30 units. However, I also heard the neighbors loud and clear, and in wanting a judge to make the final decision on the fate of their neighborhood, and I fully support that. I echo Commissioner Braun in stating that I do believe we have adequate evidence to prove that this is an unsafe project. The 2 points we keep coming back to are the traffic study and the sightlines. And the traffic study was conducted during COVID. I don't think there's really much further explanation needed here, other than I don't think it's fair to consider a traffic study conducted during COVID at that point or moving forward. And the second is the sightline approval, that the residents on the street, they rely heavily on the parking, and the road is already incredibly unsafe. Additional parking on the street is going to make it even more dangerous. So I do support us bringing this or going back.
Thank you.
You can say something.
Just,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
no, just the 7 of us.
Yeah, 'cause I thought you did.
I'm paying attention.
We're concerned. Commissioner Braun.
Just have a follow-up comment. I had written the whole thing out with some statistics. I just want to point something out. 10% is an exemption amount. It's not a mandate. It's not a requirement. It's not even an objective. It's not even a target. Just from the history of 8-30G. Towns They picked that number 20, 35 years ago so that the larger, poorest cities would not be subject to the onerous burden shifting aspect when appeals go up to court. And I spoke to one of the people that helped draft it up in Hartford. So to get to 10%, according to Mark Barnhart's most recent figures, I believe we would have to add 1,500 affordable units without building anything else based on the 2020 census data. That's my calculation, subject to someone's correction if need be. We are approaching a moratorium, which gives us 4 years to work on things, but we're not going to build 1,500 affordable units in 4 years and not build anything else. In addition, things are going to start sunsetting because the law used to only require 10 years, then 20 years, then 30 years. It now requires 40 years of deed restricted affordability. The older ones will sunset. I don't know how that will take place. So that will change the ratio. Also, what changes the ratio is the fact that Section 8 housing vouchers are part of the ratio of what they consider affordable. That goes up and down. That's out of our control. We don't even control the vouchers we get in our town. And from what my understanding, the big cities get all the vouchers and the towns get none. So that affects our ratio. So many things affect the ratio. It might go up, it might go down. I read one court case where the judge observed that our ratio went down, even though we're adding affordable housing. How does that happen? The ratio is deeply flawed, but I don't think we should be judged by it. And I don't think we should judge ourselves by it. And I don't think we should set a goal for ourselves to add 1,500 affordable housing units and not build anything else over the next 4 years just to become exempt. In my opinion, it's something that Hartford has to deal with. It's a very well-intended law. It has serious consequences. There's not one person I've spoken to that thinks this is a good project for this neighborhood. Unfortunately, it puts the commission in the position of having to create its own evidence, because if we feel there's harm, but there's not enough evidence in the record, what are we supposed to do? Approve something that's harmful? Or are we supposed to hire experts and bring them in and create our own case and become basically a litigant in a case that we're deciding? I don't know the answer to that. But those are all interesting points, and it's all based on the shifting of the burden of proof from the applicant to the commission. So hopefully some of these things will come up in court.
Thank you. Further comments? This to a vote. Current motion is to approve the settlement for 40 units. So voting aye is in support of that. Voting nay is denying that. Understand?
So denying it would take it in court.
Denying it would be going back to court, yes. Well, denying it would be not supporting this settlement.
Correct.
Let's say
Settlement.
the settlement of 40 units, precision, 40 units, whatever you want to call it. It's the current motion. So if you don't want this 40 unit settlement, vote in opposition to it. So all those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand or say nay. See 7 hands. So motion is defeated. Having said that, now, are there any other motions for a settlement? Because we still have that, it was just that motion for 40. I suspect the answer is no, but I want to give the commission the option. If there's a motion, second motion for a different settlement, namely the settlement of the proposal from the applicant, now is the time to raise it. You don't need to make it, just making sure. Yeah, I didn't, just fine. No motion, no secondary motion. Last chance. Okay. So having seen no more, the matter is, I'll just close the matter essentially.
Right, yeah, having no agreed settlement, the status quo
Yes,
remains and it will proceed.
yes. Thank you, everybody, all the neighbors. I know most of you are here for that. Let's move on to old business. Go to 86 French Street, special exception application of Robert Neely on behalf of Paige Redinger, pertaining to a rooftop deck in the Beach District.
Okay. Chairman,
I'll give him a few minutes. I'll give him a minute or two. You can stay on the record. File out.
plus.
It's another email.
Another wonders of technology.
Also, I mean, we're moving on, but
I
I
understand.
appreciate,
I just want to thank you for your consideration.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Celsi.
Go ahead, Mr. Went.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, 86 French Street is a new dwelling under construction. The owners are now seeking to include a rooftop deck in that plan. Each district regulations permit rooftop decks subject to a special exception, and further provided that the area of the deck does not exceed 50% of the area of the roof. The deck area is in compliance with that limitation, and the relevant special exception considerations are whether the location, type, character, and size and use of the building is in harmony with and conform to the appropriate orderly development of the town and neighborhood, and not hinder or discourage the use of adjacent property or impair its value. That is all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I have a motion on the item. Commissioner Levy,
Move to approve.
second Commissioner Corsello. Commissioner Levy,
Yeah, it meets the provisions of our zoning regulations. If anything, I mean, it reflects an agreement among the neighbors to keep the utilities off the roof, and it's consistent with the use of a number of the houses in the region. So based upon that, I would vote to approve.
Commissioner Corsello,
Nothing further to add to that.
Commissioner Ford, are you up to speed?
Yes.
So Commissioner Ford's back in for Commissioner Pikowski. Commissioner Randolph.
Based upon the information we provided, it didn't seem that there was any objections by the neighbors. Is that correct?
That was a representation, yes, sir.
Nothing's in the record.
We don't have anything in writing. It was just the anecdotal.
But
That's one.
we have not received any objections.
We have no objections in the record.
Thank you.
Other comments, thoughts? Standard, I mean, it's pretty customary use in the area, so certainly in harmony, not going to impair any values. Yeah, pretty de minimis impact to the area. If there was any issues. Any further comments, or can we put to a vote? All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hands. See 7 hands, passes unanimously. Next item is our zoning compliance, 1326 Post Road, application of Louis Mitri to establish a takeout food service establishment in a portion of an existing building in the Zenner Design District. Went.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the subject property is located on the corner of Post Road and Unclewood Place. Applicant seeks to establish a takeout food use in the single-story portion of the building that's at the far right-hand side as you. This space had been most recently occupied as a retail use. It was a pharmacy, it was a dress shop, and before it was a retail use for many years, it was a Baskin-Robbins store. So it had a former life as a takeout food establishment before it transitioned to retail. Now they're looking to go back to a takeout deli. There's no seating proposed, so there's no implications with respect to parking. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I have a motion on the item. Commissioner Levy,
Move to approve.
thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Randolph seconds. Commissioner Levy,
Yeah, this is where the Unity Pharmacy was. Yeah, I still remember when it was Baskin Robbins. We had all the yogurt places and then they all folded, so.
that's where 16 Handles was?
No, 16 Handles is still up.
Okay.
There was a Baskin Robbins at some point.
If you know where, I mean, I'm going to really date myself and go back to Koenig's Art Emporium. It's on the corner. That's now a place called the Wine and Cheese Spa. It's a hair salon for a while, but the single story piece was a Baskin Robbins for many years.
So another deli, sure, why not?
It's a nice sandwich.
Oh, Commissioner Randolph, sorry.
I support the continued use as a retail location, which is appropriate to the neighborhood uh, character of the buildings.
Solves full compliance with our regs.
It is, in my opinion, yes.
Further comments or questions from the commission? We put this to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand. These 7 hands passes unanimously. Next item is our POCD update, commission discussion. I think, I remember we have Commissioner Randolph's comments that have been also adjusted for pages and such. I didn't, I hate to say as well, I did not submit comments. I don't think anybody else really has, but in light of where we are, I thought it would be best to have staff through the edits that were made, and we could discuss the edits that were made, see discussion is needed on them, or we can further discuss them, but to get on the same page, at least with the edits, that and Commissioner Randolph has since you've seen your comments, as we get to those, feel free to chime in with them. That was my plan for tonight. Commissioner Harrison.
Yeah, thank you. I have additional comments, but I'm happy to share with the commission and with you guys or talk about it.
As we go, yeah, I mean, certainly what and like I said, I didn't do it myself or submit them, but you know, the idea I think was to submit them ASAP from whenever we said last time. So as we're going through, bring them up as they become material, but that doesn't mean we don't have still the option, ability to send in comments to staff even after tonight or as we go forward. So I would again encourage the entire commission to submit comments to with anything that you want discussed. So we can properly tee that up for meetings like this, or even next week, should we need it, depending on where we are tonight. So. Mr. Nguyen, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we are happy to be back on the front burner with this project to hopefully move things along. We really took to heart the substantive comments that we received from you before in the several meetings that we had to kind of talk through some of those. In this second draft, as we'll call it, the February 2024 draft, I think is reflective of comment. First and foremost, in the beginning, I'm going to go through the executive summary and introduction and through the chapters. But one of the things that we heard loud and clear from you and from others was that the original draft really lacked an executive summary to kind of coalesce upfront. Here's the snapshot view of what this document is going to say to kind of capture that flavor. So we did put together a one-page executive summary, and I'm not going to read it in its entirety, but just to highlight a few of the things, just to kind of really gauge that this document is an articulation of priorities for public and private investment over the next 10 years. It's used as a framework for regulations and for highlight local priorities for grant funding applications. The overall emphasis of this plan, as we have discussed many times together, is it really is representing targeted strategies to increase housing opportunities, including further advancing the recommendations of the Affordable Housing Plan, as well as targeted economic development opportunities near transit in our downtown. And we are not proposing wholesale change throughout the town. We understand that the people are really identifying with the neighborhoods in which they live. In the previous plan, identified actually the 2000 and 2016 plan divided the town into 11 planning districts. You wanted to make reference to that. So we did so in the appendix. We talk about it a little bit in the chapter that's housing a community that's home for all. But the overarching goals and strategies of these sections are not constrained by those neighborhood boundaries. It's more of a holistic town-wide plan. So that's why we agreed back when we laid out the framework for this plan, that was going to be the focus.
I don't necessarily agree with that though, but
And that's fine. And I understood from our previous conversations, it was important to keep that map and those planning areas, which we did, and have made reference to those in Appendix A. And we can continue that discussion. I'm not going to read every single one of these bullet points, but the priorities that came out are listed there. It's important, Adrian. I'm on page, first page, executive summary.
You're there.
Contents?
Priorities.
It's the page after the table of contents.
it's like this.
I actually have a question even
Great.
before the table of contents.
Oh, boy. Cover the picture.
So on the prior POCD, it listed staff and the commission. This only lists the.
Yeah, we will.
We listed.
Yes. It would be the intention to, we just haven't got there. So if you can walk through again, the commitment to preserve the single-family residential neighborhoods balanced with our statutory obligation to provide diversified housing units at all price points, identifying opportunities for mixed use, again, mostly within our existing commercial corridors in our Metro Center train station area. One of the things that I did overlook on the bottom of on this page, the left-hand side of the page, we pulled a quote out from
Are we on page 3?
no, I'm still on the same page. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around. From a sustainable, the left-hand column, page 3, down at the bottom, emphasizing this is a quote from a later section of the plan. Many Fairfielders strongly connect with the quality of the town with the quality of its residential neighborhoods. As such, there is little opportunity or appetite to grow its economy through expansion of its commercial and industrial area. Thus, economic growth will be driven by adaptive reuse and redevelopment. So we're not proposing expanding commercial footprint and changing the fundamental legacy neighborhoods that the prior plans have identified. And what's important to kind of reemphasize, and we touched on this, you may recall at our last discussion together on this, that this is the first piece. This is the goal and aspirational document that's at a kind of fairly high level. The next phase is to actually get down into the zoning regulation level, where the actual implementation of some of these goals and strategies can be put forward through zoning regulations. So this is the prioritizing what those goals and strategies ought to be. And then our next phase of this work is to really get into where the rubber hits the road with respect to the regulations. So moving on to the introduction on page 2. We've added a paragraph or two about progress that's been made since the last POCD has been adopted, which references 2018 work on the TOD study that was ultimately adopted by this commission and the Economic Development Commission in October of 2019. Work having to do with creating a housing trust fund and an inclusionary zoning fee. We talked about opportunities to expand opportunity for accessory dwelling units. And we've actually moved forward. You have approved some regulation amendments already that were recommendations out of that TOD study, and there will be more to come. So this plan is seeking to build on that prior work. And then the organization of the plan, we reordered. It's in red because we reordered the chapters from its original draft because we thought that framing housing, economic development, connectivity were three most important to put up front, and then the other chapters that were left in the front have been moved. Not that they don't have less importance, but we wanted to get to some of the more weighty recommendations.
And some of the sections, I think, that had the most change from the last plan. I think that for the some of the latter sections, it's building upon work that we've already kind of done. And we're kind of waiting on some of those priority items from well, some of the other priority items that get informed by other committees and commissions through the future work that they'll do as well. So they're consistent with they're much more aligned with the prior.
Are we waiting for input from like sustainability? Because I know we.
We have some stuff in it. As we progress, we'll see where some things have been inserted and where there's work that will be featured.
Okay.
Page 3, plan foundations section, we tweaked this a little bit. MetroCog called to our attention that they are no longer considered a regional planning organization, they're council of governments, so we fixed that. And I wanted to call your attention on page 4 to the map. This was the map. And what this chapter or this first part is doing is kind of saying, okay, where are we within the region? Referring to the regional plans. And so this map comes out of the MetroCog regional plan. And it's the entirety of the MetroCog region, the 6-town MetroCog region. The previous version of this map was zoomed in only on Fairfield. And so we wanted to show the map in its entirety to show that Fairfield, like any town, doesn't exist as an island. We developed as the western adjacent town to the most, to the largest city we have in Connecticut. So it's not unusual that some of the radiant development that radiated out of Bridgeport Center spilled over into the eastern part of Fairfield. And you see that's not unique to Fairfield. Almost all of Stratford kind of gets encompassed in that. And then some portions of Trumbull, as the more denser development naturally radiates out from our central city, which is Bridgeport. And so that is why in post-World War I, primarily industrial expansion in Bridgeport led to a large building boom in the eastern part of town. That is the historic development pattern. And I think it wasn't intended when we just showed for clarity, because it's a small page, it was zoomed in on Fairfield, and it gave the impression that we're drawing a line down the middle and trying to separate the town, which wasn't the intent. So we thought it would be better to show the entire region in that fashion to get the full picture.
Is the northern focus area, is that Black Rock Turnpike? Or?
Yes, that's the Black Rock Turnpike commercial corridor. You have Kings Highway, Villa Avenue corridor, or downtown, and then Southport. Those are the relevant circles. But that, again, that's a map that's plucked out of the regional plan to just kind of give a little bit of regional context.
Are we making those circles our focus area for added development?
No. This is a plan that's already been adopted by MetroCog that presently exists. We're just referring to it to kind of paint a little picture of where Fairfield sits in the regional context.
It's reflecting their interpretation of where the development is right now.
Correct.
But I mean, to clarify, I think we heard from most people loud and clear that the single-family residential neighborhoods, most people want to remain exactly the same. So to be clear, where we are targeting adaptive reuse, infill, looking at mixed use as a solution, because we also heard from folks that they really want the option of walkable communities. Where we would like to target future development is within those circles where we have Black Rock Turnpike. Because I think most people, when you look at the Black Rock Turnpike study, one of the things that folks felt is that that was designed during a very automotive centered period of time. And when you look at the safety studies, part of the resulting conclusions of the safety studies is this is an auto-designed corridor, right? And so some folks really feel like, if you change kind of the way that the buildings are and you change, through when redevelopment happens, that you might be able to make that a more pedestrian oriented corridor. So I think that we are focusing on the kind of 5% of the land area that's commercially zoned in town, or where we are being very intentional about development and redevelopment.
I don't.
Commissioner Randolph, sorry.
Yeah, so building on two of the points. So I think showing the overall region is important. One thing that might be missing from that is just as a reference to the greater metropolitan area, because we are we are a bedroom community of Stamford and New York.
Speak up just a little bit. I'm sorry.
So one thing, I think showing the overall MetroCogs region is a really good addition. But I think what a build on this might be to include our really relation to Stamford and New York. And I think there was some metric of where people worked. That's in here, right? Someplace?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm just suggesting that in addition to showing our relationship with MetroCogs, which reads a little bit as an island in here, we really are connected to Stamford and New York, lesser degree New Haven, and just make a reference to that might be helpful. And then secondly, Emmeline, I entirely agree with your observation, professional input that concentration should be within areas where there's infrastructure, there's transportation, there's density for many reasons. There are some people who are vocally opposed to that. They think we should, and I think it's a small group of people, but they're quite vocal who think we should upzone really the yellow areas, yellow and green areas in here. So if you could make sure that the logic, which I agree with, for focusing on the areas where there's infrastructure and density, if you could make sure that that point is clearly made in here, it would, I think, inform some people who have this idea that where there's green or yellow, there's opportunities, which would not be a decision. But if you could emphasize that in here, that would be helpful. Many people don't understand. Many of my constituents don't understand that. They want to put, dense housing in Greenfield Hill.
They want to put a 40-unit development up in Greenfield.
Exactly.
Are you saying we should upzone or we shouldn't upzone?
Thing I think that Emmeline was suggesting that we should upzone in areas where we have infrastructure, not in areas that do not have infrastructure. And that's a logical conclusion. Perhaps we can frame it saying we should study this, but I think we need to bring the community along. There are certain very vocal people who think we should upzone the rural parts of town. And I think that's.
I've not heard that.
That certainly wasn't the feedback we got during our public outreach.
I get that feedback,
Maybe recent.
Well, it's also one.
Yeah, no, it's
Septic map.
no, that's,
Been built up.
that's the point though,
I
is
totally
a lot of people are saying,
Upzoning.
well, that's the point though, is a lot of, I've been hearing it too, I'm not sure how vocal, is maybe it's also, I think maybe with school redistricting is I think that's right.
Well, schools are underutilized up there.
Well, but the point being like, hey, you guys are doing too much density down in these areas, why aren't you putting them elsewhere? And a lot of the simple responses, we can't put a 40-unit thing in Greenfield, don't have sewer, or what? Or any,
we can do anything, but it's just not prudent or practical.
The
well, it's a fair,
the upzoning and putting in middle housing, I think, are different issues.
that's important to make.
Yes, we can.
Commissioner.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
A couple things, and I've got something to follow up on that, but we can actually pull right out of the statute in introduction or in the housing section to the extent that it's not specifically articulated, but the statutes themselves that give you the authority and responsibility to adopt a POCD specifically says concentration of development around transportation nodes and along major transportation corridors to support the viability of transportation options and land reuse. Make provision for the development of housing opportunities, including opportunities for multi-family dwellings for all residents in the municipality in areas where it can be supported by essentially what you were saying.
Kathy, did you hear that?
There's
That's not what you're saying though, Jeff, is it?
No, it is. I'm saying, so
I think, just to paraphrase, I think what he's saying is we ought to articulate that specifically to have something to point to for those that might want greater density in other locations other than those that we're promoting.
And our current effluent that's being treated at the plant is 50% inflow and infiltration. So we have to repair what we have before we expand what we have. So when you think about when you think about, I think, why Connecticut really kind of started to put into the statute, you need to kind of redevelop where there's current infrastructure, is because so many of our aging wastewater treatment facility infrastructure is failing. And so, you know, I think when that happens, those are very large reinvestments. And oftentimes, like Fairfield has, we go to the state and say, please help us. But it's hard to keep up with what we have, let alone expanding that infrastructure, knowing that you're looking at future additional costs for helping to maintain that infrastructure down the line. So I think that's why reinvestment seems to make more sense in terms of repairing what we have, allowing that to have better efficiency at the plant, and then, you know, infilling in the areas where we already have development.
So Commissioner Braun, go ahead.
So I'm looking at the sewer map, which is on page 69 of it's in appendix A. So the septic, there's little pockets of sewer scattered in the pink area. Green should have been on the left.
So it wasn't our map.
For example, where's Greenfield Hill, like the little commercial? Does that have sewer? They must have sewer. They couldn't have that level of commercial.
It's a tiny little green
Is that
dot.
that square of green north of the Merritt?
No.
North of the Merritt. No, it's probably right there, so south of the Merritt's.
No hill.
It does it because I live at 255 and that's right outside the,
Road, Reading Road,
In here?
right there,
Reading
right?
Road? So is that an area then where Commissioner Randolph is saying we should have more density of housing because it has sewer?
Just to clarify, I'm not suggesting any specific areas. I think what staff is suggesting in their outline is that development should occur where the infrastructure exists. And one thing that's not in here, Kathy, and I just want to make sure, because I know we're on to this, is to reduce the environmental impact of any future development. So talk about the energy efficiency and the lesser environmental impact by focusing increases in density in areas where the infrastructure occurs.
And in town, that would include anywhere where there's sewer is what you're saying?
No, I mean, not necessarily, because so that area that's in Greenfield Hill, the little commercial village, that's a neighborhood design district. It's already very limited to the type of commercial uses that you can have there. It's limited in terms of the height and number of stories, less than our other commercial districts. So it's already limited by what the zoning envelope allows for you in that location, as well as the uses that are allowed. So it is kind of a matter of degrees, just like you have 2-acre single-family zoning down to, you know, homes that are on 6,000 square foot lots. Our commercial zones are the same. So, you know, this is kind of the policy document. And then, you know, we do have to move on to the zoning eventually. And that's where you get into the nitty gritty. And we can't get into the nitty gritty without getting through some of the policy, policy discussion here, coming to agreement on some of those things, and then working with the zoning regs to really kind of tighten the places where we need to tighten them and where we don't want to see higher envelope or things like that, if we need to kind of do that.
Trying to understand, is there an example of what that could look like or where it could be? Are we talking about on Milltown Road? I mean, places where there's no commercial, how does that help to add density if there's nowhere to walk to? You know what I mean?
No, we're not. I mean, the
not.
plan, we'll get, as we
Okay.
walk through this, you'll see that the areas that
Question mark in my mind.
are very discrete
Okay,
locations along.
okay.
Commissioner Harrison.
Sorry, and I know you guys were trying to get through stuff, so I.
No, listen, we should be, as we go through, these are important things, and I don't mind, I think everybody should be discussing them. Also, write down comments if, you know, you think it's, you know, things that jump out later, but this is the time to do it. And this is kind of what I was expecting, is we go through it, and if we come up to a circumstance like this, let's discuss it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Randolph. We can really only build where we have the infrastructure. That makes sense to me. I get that. But I also have concerns about traffic, about an abundance of just a lot of congestion in the Post Road area in particular. And I think that really could impede people's quality of life. So I think we just have to ask ourselves, like, how big do we want to be? I don't know.
I want to tell a story because it was really interesting. Jim's going to go, oh, why is she telling the story? But But so Jim,
I have
Jim,
full faith in you.
Jim and Mark Barnhart, and we actually had a really great, this last October, we do what's called the Southern New England Regional Planning Conference with our neighbors in Massachusetts, our neighbors in Rhode Island. And so we did it in New Haven this past fall. And so Jim, Mark, Post Road Residential, and the attorney who is representing Metro Crossings Project, they did a presentation on transit-oriented development. While they're doing their presentation, it comes up about school children and that, multifamily is great, it's really kind of beneficial for the grand list. It doesn't contribute, and we know this because we track all of our existing multifamily developments. It doesn't add more school children to the district. There was a woman who was very emotional and said, but what if we want to choose to live in apartment buildings? What if I don't want to live in a single family home? And so we had to kind of talk to this very emotional, upset woman and say, that can be your choice. But what we do find on the whole is that people choose to live in single family homes when they want to have kids. It just seems to be the pattern. That doesn't exclude her choice. But what I found out is I was just at the National Planning Conference in Minneapolis, and the same woman, she gave a presentation. And she started off just talking about the fact that in the area that she lives in Massachusetts, very similar to parts of Connecticut, she and her husband had decided that they really just wanted to live an apartment lifestyle. They're of a certain generation. They only wanted to have one car. They didn't want to deal with yard maintenance. They liked going to brunch on Sundays. They just didn't want that responsibility, and they liked being in a walkable place. That's their choice. They should have that option, that diversity of opportunity. And she went on to say, and this is where the emotional part comes in, when she was pregnant, her landlord showed up one day and she got evicted. Highly illegal, right? She had to move into a new place on her due date, had her baby 5 days later. Thankfully, they found a new place to live. She sent an email with a photo of her baby and to her landlord and said, oh, by the way, I just wanted to let you know you had a new tenant. Got evicted. And so I think that we can't determine for people what their choices are going to be, but we have to provide that diversity of choice if we're really going to have equitable housing choices within Fairfield. So we can't tell families that they can't live in apartments if they're only going to have one child and they want to rent a 2-bedroom and they don't want to be single family homeowners. I don't think that we can tell them that we can't, but I think we do a disservice if we don't provide that choice in Fairfield, because we've heard from folks that they want that choice. So I think when we talk about policy goals within the plan, that's where we kind of have to think about what are the experiences that we're trying to offer for Fairfielders who live in Fairfield, want to stay in Fairfield, folks who might be at Sacred Heart or Fairfield U and want to start their professional and young lives here. How do we provide those choices? And so that's what we're kind of trying to do through some of the options that are available through looking at some of the policy goals.
I just brought up traffic because, and I think people should deserve to have a choice. There's no question in my mind. I mean, I know not a single family home is for everybody. I live in a neighborhood where there are a lot of duplexes. I live in a duplex. It works for me. It works for a lot of people.
But to assume that
My point
point in family brings traffic is not a correct assumption all the time either. Single family homes that are not near things bring more traffic.
I think her
And I
point
think
was,
sometimes-
I think her point was though Post Road, and, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think, but I
Yeah,
think Post Road in general, it's currently congested. I think,
We are,
I'm not saying if you do add multifamily, it may not add more congestion.
They want to walk.
Maybe, but you,
we're sensitive to that. And I think what this plan speaks to is what we're seeing redevelop are not vacant. I mean, they may be vacant now, but they were occupied by, in many cases, heavy industrial uses that had a lot of traffic. There's no traffic there today because, for example, Exide, there used to be a lot of traffic there, but there hasn't been traffic there in 25 years. It's going to be less traffic now because it's going to be or is planned to be an automobile dealership, which is a huge traffic generator. But Metro Center, that area where people are concerned about traffic, and I get it.
you still need a car to drive to the grocery store. There's no grocery store on Post Road.
There were 7,000 employees at that location
Yeah.
with lesser road
But
infrastructure than what we have
I don't
today.
think we're looking to blow up the population number if that's your concern. How big do we want to be? Where we've gone, and I've got some numbers to share, and maybe this is the right time to do it, just to give some.
Well, Commissioner, I think.
Yeah, just for the record, I'm very much a proponent of having diverse housing here, and we should definitely, and I hope we can accomplish that, but I have heard complaints through my 3 years on this commission about the congestion on Post Road.
Yeah.
I am not making it up. We've heard about it during a number of applications.
Well, here's a question, I guess.
Exacerbating it further, I don't think is a good thing.
Here's a question for everybody and even to staff, though. I mean, congestion has been, we always deal with congestion with these applications. But I guess the question is, we should be mindful of it, I guess, in this policy, in this POCD. But is that too much of a nitty gritty item that when we see them, we'll see traffic issues when it comes to us with a specific application? But should that be should that be, I guess, a consideration of ours in this POCD? Is that too much of a nitty gritty item? We will certainly see it in applications. It goes back to, I guess, what our discussion was, expanding the zone on the Post Road, is that not everything, even if we expand it, it's not gonna be overbuilt by tomorrow. It's gonna take.
Right. I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of both. You need to be cognizant of potential impact, but then you're gonna measure those. You'd be surprised, and most people are, to know that 24-hour traffic counts on the Post Road today, the 24-hour volumes are actually less than they were in 2013. However, those volumes are at different times a day. The traffic reports 30 years ago used to have a pretty clear peak morning. There would be a big bell curve in the morning, then it would kind of swoop down in the middle of the day, then swoop up again in the afternoon peak. Today's traffic, the peaks aren't quite as high, but it's more like a plateau. It kind of goes up and then kind of goes flat all the way across. It's at a lower level, but I'm finding my own experience in being in, working here for 35 plus years, that there's more traffic midday than there is in the morning rush. My morning commute is easier than it used to be, but getting around at lunchtime is a lot more difficult. So there are definitely times a day, I would agree, that you want to avoid the Post Road at certain times. But overall, there's less overall traffic, but it's different. We're behaving differently since COVID, I think, as well. So their midday traffic is way higher than it used to be.
So
Sorry.
just to piggyback, and this is my own anecdotal observation. Part of the reason why it appears like we have more traffic these days is because of the way the lights are set up, so people can stop all 4 lanes of traffic for an extended period of time that then naturally builds up the wait time at the lights. So when we get those pictures and look at the line of traffic, it's really because the light has been red for so long. It's not that there's more cars going through the intersection. Probably not relevant to what we're talking about, but
I think that's it.
I'm not surprised to hear that the numbers are down today than they were.
I'm guilty of this myself. I'm my worst version of myself when it comes to patience when I'm behind the wheel of a car. That 5 minutes sitting in a doctor's waiting room seems to be nothing, but sitting for 5 minutes in a traffic jam seems like an hour and a half.
And it's really only.
So it's kind of
1.2
somehow
minutes.
somehow you're in kind of some sort of suspended animation when you're behind the wheel. But
Commissioner, anything else?
no,
Commissioner Corsillo.
I think part of what's great about this exercise is we have a chance to take a holistic view that's different from weighing in on a single application for development in a place like Post Road, where we may only be able to look at, is this going to generate traffic? And here we can make recommendations for things that aren't normally within our purview, things that we should be doing to improve the pedestrian experience, to improve, to reduce congestion, not just through zoning. And so, I know there are things in the POCD that have to do with promoting, bus use and things like that, promoting other modes of transportation. But then even you know, on Post Road, we all know there's the section of Post Road that's very walkable and then other pieces that aren't. And how much might congestion be reduced if we change the zoning in the less walkable parts so that it wasn't conducive to gas stations and things like that, that maybe do generate more vehicular traffic. And so I think, you know, while part of this is going to be, you know, how much do we want to build up a place like Post Road? And that is focused on the built environment. I think we also have a chance to look at other ways we can reduce congestion. And so I think, you know, to me, I think it's a great opportunity. I think there's a lot we can do. I thought we had a great discussion about Post Road in particular. I think we could have I would love to have a similar discussion about Black Rock Turnpike, because I think there's also a lot that this POCD could address on Black Rock. But I do think, you know, we need to address the zoning and where do we want density or where do we not want density. But I think we can also help alleviate those concerns through some recommendations that aren't necessarily about the buildings themselves.
Commissioner Seaborn and Petrowski, just so it's clear, this is something you guys can be jumping in at any point. you want. Okay, just want to be clear about it. Commissioner Randolph.
So I think the question earlier was whether there should be reference to traffic planning and what the impact on traffic, which is something we all hear about all the time. And I think that there is a place for that. And as to build upon what Commissioner Corsillo just said, the problem of traffic is that you hear the quip, if you're complaining about traffic when you're in traffic, you are the traffic. So part of the problem is that you've got to drive everywhere. That is why we have traffic. We are so car centric, and the town was built for every short trip to be done in a car, that I think it is addressed generally here on page 38, interconnected community, where you talk about the importance of the transportation network that serves all, critical roadway intersections, address student parking. I think if, as a general principle, so if we think about what the overall objectives are, come up with a long-term plan, the principles are reduce short-term traffic rides, which are what contribute to traffic. When you're on Black Rock Turnpike, it's human nature to drive to stores because you can't walk there. I'm a cyclist. I do not feel safe riding in this town. And I would like to feel safe. So I would like to be part of the solution. And I think you've got it addressed here. And if we could beef it out to say, part of the problem and everyone says apartment buildings, it's not, it's gas stations. It's gas and convenience stores are the biggest generators of traffic, period, end of sentence. I know people question the ITE, but if you look at the vehicle trips, just next time you go to a gas station, count how many cars are in there. 5. Every time you're there, that's 5 times, you know, every 5 minutes, there's 5 cars there. We need to shift our focus from a vehicular centric, if we're going to grow, and we are going to inevitably grow because the state's growing and we're a popular place. We've got a lot of amenities as a town. We're going to grow. We need to grow sensibly, and we need to plan for it and be less car centric and more pedestrian oriented. And that's how we address the vehicular issue in the town.
I think it's a fair point, but I don't think the car issue is special to Fairfield. I think you go to a lot of towns, not
It's
just
a
in Connecticut,
problem everywhere.
but we also don't have good, like, I can't take the train to my friend's house, really. I can't take a bus to we don't really have that bus, you know, capability to really go around town that much. And that's something we should think about. You know, that would be a great recommendation.
I think that's generally addressed in here, but it's
I know a nurse who works at Carrollton, she lives in Bridgeport. She has to take 4 different buses to get to the Carrollton Bridgeport. It should take her 12 minutes. So it's not as easy as it always sounds.
Oh, it's not easy at all.
So
But
I think
that the objective,
Yeah.
I think we're all on the same page that traffic is a problem. It needs to be addressed here, but in broad terms of accommodating public transportation, increasing density, reducing uses that generate traffic, gas stations. I mean, I don't know how many gas stations we have, but a lot. We've got way too many gas stations in this town. We don't need them. We could have half. I mean, you look at Manhattan, Manhattan's got like 3 gas stations.
You know, cars on the subway though.
But there's way more cars in Manhattan than there are in Fairfield, I'm certain. So, but back to, should traffic be addressed in here? Yes, but
You give somebody a bigger opportunity to do something other than a gas station, this land becomes more valuable. That's some other thing.
Commissioner Levy, go ahead.
So just going back to the priorities, the third one down, further study potential for housing types by the general density strategic locations. I think strategic locations is a little too ambiguous.
What page?
That's on page 3. I'm going.
Executive summary.
Yeah, I'm going backwards just a little bit there, but
Yeah.
I mean, but it all ties in. I mean, I think
We get-
we'll have further discussion on, like, with the multifamily on page 15. But, you know, some of us may feel that 4 families should be allowed in any zone.
Well, that's a conversation we need to have when we get to the, so we're just kind of setting that up.
That's gonna be a big one.
Yeah,
I saw that as
so
well.
just sort of strategic locations, maybe
Well-
something to address.
Right, and then in where those strategic locations are going to be what's in that chapter. And if you don't agree with what
We will not just see.
there and want to change that, that's what we need to talk about.
That could be subjective. It's really not objective, like a strategic location, like what you may think would be strategic may not be to me or somebody else, right?
Well, what we're implying, we're not generally saying we need to build housing everywhere. We want to, as we stated in the earlier intro to that, is it's targeted along existing commercial corridors and near transit. And those are the strategic locations. And there are other smaller targeted strategies within the housing plan, within the housing section that talks about that. And if you want to contract or expand those opportunities, that's what we need to flesh out.
Commissioner Braun.
Yeah, so I think Jim was about to talk about population. I had a question which I raised last year this time or whatever. So on page 5, it has trends. And it says, I assume this is census data from 10 to 2020, 2010 to 2020. Yes. The
Yeah.
town, okay, the town along with Fairfield County is growing at 4% over, I guess, that 10-year period, but the state is only growing at 1%. So I'm trying to understand that. Is our goal to expedite our population growth by enabling more housing and density, and how much more do we want to grow? How big do we want our town to get? If we're already going 4 times the state average.
I'm going to share some data and then we can continue that discussion. This is just a statement of what's happened in the last 10 years. It's not a goal to grow another 3.5%. It's just over.
It's based on current,
That's from 2010 to 2020.
that's based on the current infrastructure zoning regs and everything else. That's how it's been.
No, that's based on what actually occurred.
That's what actually occurred based on the current framework that we're living in, right? So now we're changing the framework going forward. Does that mean we're going to grow the population faster than it has been growing? Like, I don't know.
Mike, I don't think changing the POCD in itself is gonna make a change in the population growth one way or the other. It's just what we do implementing it may very well if we have additional options and such, but I mean, I think their goal was just to state facts as to, in this section. That's just all they're saying is.
But that is a question I have.
Okay.
Does adding more housing contribute to population growth? And if we add a lot more housing than we have been adding,
It's
does that contribute to expedited population?
it's cyclical.
And household composition is changing, right? So 68% of all households in Fairfield are 1 and 2 person households. So the household composition is changing a bit.
So a couple things I want to talk about before we get into the housing stuff, because it's kind of out there. So what I'm handing out is to kind of show how this is cyclical. This is a 50-year view of what's occurred from 1970.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you have another copy?
Yes, it should be going down.
Right?
Oh,
We'll make sure.
Okay, great.
Are we sure? I've got 2 more.
Oh, okay, great.
I'm sorry, I thought I gave it.
No worries.
My apologies.
did you leave yourself for that one?
So this is a 50-year snapshot. right? That hopefully will address that question. I'll look at the numbers specifically, but if you just look in the middle, in 50 years from 1970 to 2020, the overall population grew by 8.9%. Total housing units grew by 27.6%. School enrollment decreased by 20.9%, and enrollment per housing decreased by 38%. And it's cyclical. If you look at statewide school enrollment or towns, even Fairfield, that enrollment tends to rise and fall in 20-year family life cycles. So you'll get a 20-year kind of upswing, then kind of a 20-year dip, and then another upswing. And that's reflected in what happened here in Fairfield. All the while, there's never been a decrease in the number of housing units. It's always increasing. So if you start from 1970, there were consecutive 10-year periods where we actually had population decline. Even though housing units went from 17,000 and change in 1970 to 20,000 and change in 1990. Over that 20-year period, population declined. School enrollment also declined. But if you look at, I think the ultimate reason for that is what's been trending and what Emmeline was driving at. Family sizes are much different than they used to be. Family household size, I don't have, population per housing unit in 1970 was 3.3 people per household. 1990, that was down to 2.6. So that's a fairly significant change in the way people live. And then it upticked a little bit. Birth rates change. And then after 1990, we had 20-year consecutive periods of growth in population and also school enrollment. But if you look at enrollment per housing unit, again, dramatically different. In 1970, it was 0.71 students per housing unit. In 2000 or 1990, it was at 0.3. It was less than half. We experienced a 20-year period of contraction where schools were closed or consolidated, and you recall that we consolidated to 2 high schools, and then that swings, that family life cycle curve comes back up, ticking up from 2000 in 2010, and now from 2010 to 2020, we're seeing a modest decline in the enrollment numbers. So housing units have been steadily increasing all the while family size has dropped all the while. And enrollment kind of rides this kind of wave of peaks and troughs, where the next 10-year projection shows moderate decline and rebounding back to where we are today by 2032. So it's not a linear thing. So to say that expanding housing opportunity doesn't lead to a linear increase in population, it's going to be cyclical depending on choices. And I think population per housing unit isn't going to change dramatically higher. If anything, it's going to probably get less. You know, people are getting married later, starting families later. There's just fewer people per housing unit. And the fact is that nearly 2/3 of our housing units in Fairfield don't have any school-age children. And not that this is a zoning against kids thing. This is just a reflection of what the data shows. The other thing I want to hand out to you, and I won't hand it out just.
And also that people are living longer.
They are indeed. You know, my wife is a product of, graduated from Andrew Ward High School. She's the youngest of, well, her and her twin sister are the youngest of 5. Her mother still lives in that house on Knapp's Highway. So there have been no children in the school system for 50 years. But if that house were sold and a younger family moves in, those numbers are going to change. So it ebbs and flows.
Commissioner Randolph.
Yes, one addition to this that I would suggest request going forward is affordability. If there's a way to gauge affordability over the years, that would be a helpful input, because the suggestion to stop housing would affect affordability.
Well, I'm going to speak to that too. The other thing that I know is out there, I don't want to call it the elephant in the room. It's the reality that the Board of Ed is dealing with, and what I am sure you and your neighbors and your constituents are speaking to you about, this racial imbalance issue that the Board of Ed deals with, and how does that interface with what you guys do, what your applications see? And I've struggled with that for a while, thinking about it, but there was an article in last week's paper. I don't know if you saw, there was a bill that was pending that discussed maybe a study to help figure out what the true impact of moving kids around for the sake of curing racial imbalance. I know the bill died, but it brought to focus to me some of the things that make that racial imbalance law. And the argument was, hey, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I agree with that, because if you look at this map that we put in here, American cities, like most cities in the world, develop in their core and they radiate outward. So the article focused on the four communities that are under the racial imbalance are Fairfield, Greenwich, West Hartford, and Hamden. It shouldn't be any surprise that those are all communities that abut the largest cities in the state.
And just to add to that, in most other areas in the country, this would be one city, right? And so you'd have your core and then you'd have your suburb
Right.
that would spread out. But because our political geographies are so compact and small in Connecticut, instead of this being one city, this is many cities. So that's where you kind of get the odd, where you've got one half that's developed and one half that might not be.
But the essence, my takeaway from that article, and it was Representative Lieber kind of pointed out, you can't fall into racial imbalance unless you have a substantial number of minority students to begin with. So it's kind of a paradox, and that if you're a community that has almost zero minority student enrollment, you're never going to be in racial imbalance, even though you're way more racially imbalanced than a community that has a fair percentage of minority population. So that's kind of a paradox that this law points out. And so because we have enough or a substantial amount of housing types and densities that give rise to growth of minority populations, that's what gives rise to this racial imbalance issue. And I've got some numbers here that'll help focus this. I think a lot of people outside of Fairfield will be surprised that we have a 25.6% minority enrollment. Because from the outside world, people view Fairfield as an exclusive town. That number is growing. And what's important, I think.
Not overall population, the student population.
Hand up, thanks.
That's student population or?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not our
So-
overall town population.
What I'm going to look at in this chart here, I look at it a different way than is presented. I'll wait till everybody has. So kind of going to the issue. And this isn't a solution, it's just my own personal view of the world. So take it for what it's worth. This chart comes out of the Board of Ed, Fairfield Public Schools Elementary School Facilities School Planning document, February 11th, 2020. And what it shows is that overall, you look at the bottom, K through 5 minority enrollment increased from 20.7% in the 2015-2016 school year to 25.6% in the 2019-2020 school year. And they list that column 5-year change as 4.9%, which is true. 25.6% is 4.9 percentage points higher than 20.7%. But what they don't do is the column that I've added, is that 4.9% is actually a 23% growth in 5 years from the previous 20.7%. So they're showing us at a 4.9% change, really not, it's 4.9 percentage point change, but it's 23.7% growth.
Understand.
Gives the basis every year.
Rate of change.
So you start at 27,
Change, yeah.
you start at 20.7%, right? Bottom. K through 5 district average, left-hand column, 2015, 2016 is 20.7%. You end up at 25.6%.
4.9 is an absolute change, the 23%
Correct.
change.
The growth, the
Increase.
percentage growth. So that 4.9% represents 23.7% growth in minority enrollment over 5 years.
5-year change of 4.9 is meaningless.
Yes.
But what's more important, so to this, if you look, we ran the numbers for each of the school. And what it shows, importantly, I think, is that there are 6 other schools other than McKinley there are 6 other schools experiencing higher minority rate growth than McKinley School. McKinley School still remains the highest percentage and the most imbalanced, but the other schools are gaining ground. And I think that's an important observation. It doesn't cure the racial imbalance issue. We're not going to build our way out of racial imbalance. But I think it's important to note that there are 6 other schools that are growing in minority population faster than McKinley School is. So if, Burr, for example, is growing the fastest at 59.6%. Now, of course, it stands to reason if you start at the lowest percentage, an increase is going to represent a higher percentage growth. But still, I think it warrants noting that McKinley is not growing in minority population at the fastest rate. There are other schools that are doing that.
Just a question. Are all the schools roughly, are they all populated the same? They're all roughly. So would that?
They're not, some are 304. I don't have that. I may have it somewhere.
Depends on the age of the building.
Some are 340.
Number of classrooms.
They got it here.
I know like
It's
Dwight.
all over the place.
I
Yeah, it's all over the place.
Well, there's 2 elements to that question. Not every school has the same capacity, but then not every school is also currently utilized in the same.
Efficiency either. Yeah.
I just want to add, this is a semantic point, but as some folks from the McKinley community have pointed out, McKinley is not actually racially imbalanced. It's every other district that is racially imbalanced.
Yes.
Right, and that's to the point of the law, that if you're a community that has near 0 minority enrollment, you're never going to be racially imbalanced under the eyes of the law, even though, as you point out, you're far more racially imbalanced than other schools. I think that's the struggle and the frustration, and I share that frustration with your colleagues at the Board of Ed. It's not as easy to say, well, we grew that way and that's what it is. No, other schools are catching up, but they're not gonna, it's not fast enough to cure that imbalance.
Commissioner Braun.
Is the state looking, there was a recent review, I think, by the state Department of Education, I guess, about that racial imbalance. I don't remember the result of that.
Well, you're talking specifically in Fairfield?
Yeah.
They told Fairfield.
I may get this.
There was a.
They said.
The Board of Ed,
was denied.
they were endeavoring to come up with a plan. They had a lot of scenarios they considered and then ultimately decided that none of those met their goals and appealed to the Board of Ed for more time. That we don't have a solution yet. And the Board of Ed said, no, you've had time. You have now till, I don't know the date. It's like,
The state said that. to
Yeah.
the Board of Ed.
And I get it. And I know in the reaction to that, there's, hey, we need to, and it's frustrating. I understand in what, when we talk about, we can't move. Metro Center is the largest development site we have in town. There was a multi-million-dollar investment made by the state to put a 3rd train station there. There's infrastructure. We're spending millions of dollars to upgrade the sewer line there. We can't move where that is. It's at a fixed location. Our infrastructure assets are in fixed locations. I understand the stress that there is out there in terms of this whole racial imbalance issue, and I understand it. But I'm only offering, this is not a solution to anything at all. It's just food for thought to recognize that there are other districts that are growing at a faster rate. It's not fast enough to catch up, but it speaks to more diversity more broadly cast throughout the town than I think people, than the numbers show at first glance. That's my only point.
And I think the other thing that when we get into the housing chapter, we have a lot of single family home supply. We don't have a lot of the other types of supply, and that's what we're trying to add more within the mix in the infill and the adaptive reuse that we do. So that's where we're adding that choice. I think Jim has said previously to this commission that it is single family homes that are the largest driver of where students end up. And we're proposing much change to the single family neighborhoods. Where we're proposing most of the change is in diversifying the housing stock through mixed use and multifamily.
Okay, I want to jump back to page 10. Jump to page 10. I need to recap for you the couple of pages of the public engagement that we took. Familiar with that. Plan goals on page 10. And again, to refresh, the white pages is the narrative background information in each of the chapters, and then the blue, I'll call the blue pages, are the actual goals and strategies. These were plan goals that you first discussed back in June of 2022. We didn't change much. We got some feedback from you folks. And bullet point number 3, we recognize that there are some competing policy interests in going back to the racial imbalance kind of thing. There are competing policy interests at play, a lot of things. I mean, the state has, as we talked about, a state investment public policy to put housing and infrastructure near transit and infrastructure. That leads to the kind of densities that create potentially some of these, the racial imbalance calculus. That's what's kind of sets it off. So we recognize that there are competing public policy interests when we talk about resilience and potential zoning densities. So we're saying significant zoning density increases in most of these areas is discouraged, but understanding that there may be some isolated cases where that may not be the case. Bullet point number 6, we were correctly advised that we shouldn't be using the word disabilities, that we should be emphasizing abilities or capabilities. So we made that change. In multimodal streets, we kind of wanted to pop as a priority. So again, with some of these numbers that we kind of threw out there statistically for you, just to kind of have in the back of your mind, I'll now, why don't walk us through some of the changes that were made in the next chapter, which is the housing community.
And I think we largely want to focus, I think, outside of just some of the areas where we need kind of larger insertions, we really just want to focus on, for lack of better terminology, the blue pages, because that's really where the policies that are then going to inform, are we looking to make future modifications to our zoning regulations to really enact those policies? I think that's where we kind of need to focus more of our time. As Jim described, we do reference the 2000 POCD planning areas that we've added as an Appendix A. To summarize, it's our single family residential neighborhoods are largely being supported as they are without much proposal for change. We did add a section where we speak about Fairfield's housing progress that we've made and the fact that we have added multifamily to our current housing mix, that we also added our inclusionary requirements since the last COCD, and that we are on target to meet the 830G moratorium, hopefully by the end of this year. That's on page 13. I'm sorry. And then we clarified millennials. Just made a couple of other minor changes. And then we do have a small section that does speak to, because I think we've been working on the document for quite some time, and during the interim, we actually adopted some of the TOD standards that we talked about in concept based on some of the projects moving faster than our planning work, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. Just going back to our discussion, you mentioned that your mother-in-law still lives in the house where she raised our kids. My parents are still in the house because they can't find another place that would suit them in Fairfield. So they're in their single family home. So could we maybe just have, there are more seniors in town, or just like when we talk about the different generations, that just might be worth noting because I think that would contribute to why we would need more, housing options too. I don't know, I mean, is that a real issue or is it just more anecdotal?
No, it's a real issue because we hear all the time what you just articulated, that I'd love to downsize, but I have nowhere to go. But so some of the housing style options we're talking about could be an opportunity for those. Like, for example, Anchorage, which is a 90-unit development that on Uckor Road that was completed in 2021, right at the peak, filled up rather rapidly, largely by folks that were downsizing seniors in Fairfield. They sold their house at the peak of the COVID market and moved into a rental product. A lot of people want to downsize or sell their home and buy a smaller unit, a townhouse type. But this was a rental product, but it filled up really quickly, largely by folks that already lived in town and sold their house, their empty nest, if you will, at the peak of COVID real estate pricing. So we have, I think, there is an aging population at the very bottom of page 13. There's a paragraph about that, so we can that carries over to page 14. So there's definitely an increased demand for downsizing seniors. So that is talked about.
I remember in November, we talked about condos, how they stopped being built.
Right, exactly. So there's multiple factors in what's driving that, and then that gets us to the ultimate recommendations.
We have something about ADU expansions in this.
Yes, that is actually part of, so if we start on page 19, the first of the blue pages for a community that is home to all recommendations. Strategy A is follows up on that diversify housing options and strategic locations. And that's where we're really kind of talking about that infill within our commercial corridors. So this is where we talk about the center design commercial business district and really kind of looking to revise our regulations. This is something that I think Mark Andre brought up when he brought his pre-app forward, that within the center design business district, as well as the design business district, we still have that cap on the 50-50 proportionality requirement for, if you do whatever proportion of commercial you do, we're now requiring that your residential is limited to 50% of that. So if you're only doing 10,000 square feet of commercial, then you only get 10,000 square feet of residential.
The design commercial district that encompasses Blackrock.
Yes.
Blackrock
Yes.
too, right?
Yes.
So in terms of Blackrock area, the Blackrock Turnpike area, I should say. So I am on board with the eliminating the 50% residential cap, but that I don't believe addresses the parking setback issue. And I don't, unless I missed it, I don't recall seeing.
Two separate issues. I agree with you.
They're separate, but yeah. So is that addressed somewhere in here?
It is, but I think it's in the sustainable Fairfield section, because that's kind of more of the economic development section. And we have, I think we do talk about kind of working on a hybrid form-based code. Because
Yes.
we have so much built environment, we really have to retrofit.
Well, that's the issue, and it's hard to separate the two, because if you look at that area, there are two big issues as I see it. One being the cap, and then the parking situation, and the two of them sort of combine to make Blackrock the unwelcoming place it is. Right? It's like it's both of those two things working together, and so I feel like to me, reading through this, one of the most impactful things I think can be addressed in the POCD is just the overall picture of Blackrock. And I think those are the two big pieces of it is addressing the parking situation and figuring out a way potentially, I obviously don't speak with anyone else here, but figuring out a way to address the massive parking setbacks in the front in conjunction with the residential. And if we were able to come to consensus on those two issues together, I mean, that could totally change the look and feel of Black
When you
Rock.
say the parking, it's not the number of spaces, but you
The
want the
number.
building, you want the parking.
Potentially that too, but I'm thinking.
You don't want the parking between the street and the building, you want it behind the building.
Exactly.
So that's, I've got a note, I don't know that it's encompassed on this section, but I have a note to carry that thought forward to.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's, I think it's worth, if we get to the point where.
So if,
we
so.
decide as a commission.
So if,
to incorporate that.
there's a major redevelopment of a property, and firstly, I agree with you that the parking situation there is solely for, you know, it warrants the short trip we're talking about. But it's also important to note that in the 60s and 70s, when many of those developments were undertaken, the regulations didn't permit residential at all.
Right.
That was a later add-on. So we may be seeing opportunity or demand to include some residential as properties potentially redevelop. So what you're saying is if that happens, that's the opportunity to push things.
Well, and not only if that happens, but I think also the reverse. It's like a little bit of chicken and egg. I'm not sure why anyone would want to, most developers would want to put a real mixed use with residential above it, given the current, I mean, it's just so uninviting. But if we were to proactively change the zoning to force the parking in the back or under whatever, I think it would also be more inviting to the kind of mixed use development that at least I would prefer to see there.
Setting a maximum setback, which might be the curb
Right.
line rather.
Right.
And I have discussed this many,
Yeah.
many times.
Right, I've got that. And I don't know that it's captured on this page, but I'm noting this when we get to where it may be most relevant to or further that discussion.
Let's go down the line. Levy, Harrison, Randolph.
Yeah, again, on page 19, sort of the same point as before, number 6, undertake a study to identify missing housing middle types where they might be permitted. You know, and then referring to select areas, it's too limiting. Right now, we're talking about like multifamily zones. If anything, it should be rewritten to undertake a study to identify missing middle housing types and explore expanding where they might be permitted or they might be appropriate. That's just my sense of it.
I think that saying that we want to study, it will encompass those areas. Like, I think we've heard loud and clear from folks that they want to maintain a lot of the single family residential neighborhoods. So I think we do have to be, if we're thinking about the way in which there's good transition zones where, you know, even the DRD zone, for example, the way that the DRD zone is written is it's intended to be a transition zone. So it's intended to kind of have your commercial corridor, have your mixed middle adjacent to that, or your condo developments, or multifamily adjacent to that. And so I don't know that the appetite from the general constituency right now is to open up all. I'll speak for, I think, some of the workshop sessions that we did, that I don't know that the appetite for wholesale change is there. I think we need to start discreetly first. That's just based on.
A bit more open-ended. There's more wiggle room.
Harrison?
Yeah, I would just say I concur with Commissioner Cursillo just on the parking situation on Blackhawk Turnpike and making a very, you know, thoughtful transformation there, because I think it's just not walkable, it's ugly, and it's ripe for making it more inviting and just more livable. So I hope we can, you know, explore that a bit more and see if that can, we can find consensus. I think we can. I think it's a great idea. It'll take some time, right? But
Oh, without a doubt.
Can you get that map on the state proposed redevelopment? That was all the rotaries and stuff.
Yeah, we can have that in there.
That should be added.
We probably should add that in our interconnectivity portion.
The only,
Go
Not
first.
that it'll ever be built, but.
Just to follow up, yeah, I mean, I like Steve's idea though of keeping it more open-ended. I understand. I think you're right what the consensus is, but even with under strategy B1, you know, maintaining the current zoning standards, when we're trying to explore this gentle density and seeing what can be done in these other areas, I wonder if it's worth not being so clear. I mean, not being so clear that we are going to be not looking towards change in those areas. It might be, I mean, and I don't know if it's possible in AAA to be having like cluster housing up there or taking a 2-acre zone and putting 4 houses on it, you know, in such a way. But I wonder if it's worth saying either we will study the possibility of it or allowing ourselves to open up to it, because B1 especially, I'm not a huge fan of, because I think that knocks out potentially looking at those areas for gentle density. And it could be just making one a duplex, or doing things like that. So I think anything we can do to, and I think adding in the, references to the, of 11 characteristics of the characteristics of 11 neighborhoods is helpful. It shows where we are, where we have been. But I think allowing us the opportunity to explore that is important, but because I think B1 will just, anything else came up, you know, any kind of regulation amendment or any kind of, people are gonna go right to that, rightfully so, and, you know, it's gonna be hard for the commission. Now, that could be, yeah, I mean, and maybe your thought about having a discrete, and this is not for this one, it's one for a decade from now. That could very well be the
Right.
case too. But I wonder if nixing that, keeping the, nixing like the B1 thing or making it more of a undertake a study gives us the flexibility that we're looking for. And then the balance of having the
I'm interested.
appendix A would be there to show, listen, this is where we have, you know, the current.
So you're saying that A6 is in conflict with B1.
I think B1, yeah, I think B1 conflicts gentle density idea in general. Now, we could be knocked out because of structural and improvements and all that kind of stuff, because as we said, 40 units up in Greenfield Hill is not gonna happen. But maybe somebody on a 2-acre takes their house and is like, we're gonna make a 2-family home. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we decide to have that discrete change start with that. Maybe that's something we can do instead of being as of right, it's a special permit or a special exception that comes to us, so we can take a look at it and let the neighbors have their say as well. I think anything we can do to be, even though, you know, and we were saying, Steve, I think Steve and I especially, anything we can say that's consider or study.
That's the one thing I wanted to point out is we did soften the declarative statements in this section where it said, you know, do this or do that. It's now consider, or so.
I would say A5, I would add consider there. I mean, anytime undertake a study, fine, that's an easy one because it's not committing to like a certain policy, certain regulation.
Yep.
Undertake a study, not consider undertake a study. That doesn't make sense to me. But I would nix the B1 thing or soften it to some extent. If we're looking towards gentle density, we have to be mindful that we don't say something that knocks that
Can I
out.
just say there's multiple locations of that too? I think in the upfront, there's almost the same wording that also conflicts. So if we're changing that, then
Well,
there's.
Whereas it must be look at it now.
Even number 5, it says, you know, from B to C. I mean, it might be within A and double A, you know?
I don't, yeah, I mean, but even adding the consider increase, I don't mind specifically
But then
identifying.
eliminate, identified from B to C. I mean, we're limiting ourselves there.
Well, I don't mind, I mean, because I think they had staff and the consultant had like, listen, B and C made sense because of a specific reason. I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Well, again, we're
The first priority right here.
But like on Oldfield Road,
Preserve single family residential neighborhoods, which I get the spirit of, but even if you say prioritize any additional density in commercial corridors rather than preserving.
Yeah, so I mean, do you see that?
So then why don't we just strike out the second sentence? Undertake a study to identify missing middle housing types and where they might be permitted.
Yeah.
And then just leave it.
Yeah.
Because
It should be.
I-
Well, yeah, definitely that for A6. I can see that. I mean, like I said, I would still B1 to maintain current zoning standards. I would.
You want to soften that up so it's not such a declarative statement.
And I do
I wouldn't mind getting rid of it. to be
I would
honest.
make it, and we're.
I know 10 years seems like a really long time.
I know, I mean,
We
when
start to redo this in 7 years. So I'm just thinking about like, just how long planning processes
I
take.
don't expect, yeah, I mean, listen, we adopt this tomorrow, we're not, but I would adopt this tomorrow. I'm not expecting all of AAA to all of a sudden turn into a
Yeah.
duplex.
We just.
I think as a commission, you can throw good ideas in there and then pace yourselves.
We could pass an amendment. We could overnight say 4 families permitted in all districts. Done.
Or by special exception, and then
Right, by special exception, they come. I mean, Oldfield Road is,
I mean,
a higher density and
I
a.
think the goal is though, I think the goal priority should be exploring gentle density throughout Fairfield. And any kind of statement that kind of goes against that. The the small step implementations make sense, but I think we still, this is a policy thing where I think we want to highlight that exploring gentle density in all areas is up for grabs, so to speak. Doesn't mean we have to do it.
it should be
Studied or encouraged, and I don't mind that, I just don't want, if we have this language in there, then all of a sudden an applicant comes in and says, I really want to change this in this area, and everybody's like, well, we can't do that because it'd be at one, and we're sitting there going like, well, I guess we can't because we literally just approved.
We can, I hear what you're saying, and I think we need to balance that a little bit, because again, there was a call to pay homage to our legacy neighborhoods and not make complete change, but at the same time, we don't want to be, you're saying we're being too specific in some of these things. So I hear what you're saying. We can work on that.
And it could just simply be, as I said, explore, study. It doesn't even have to be considered, promote, maybe. I mean,
I hear you.
What I will say though, is the reason why we worded, at least this is to your point, Kathy, about the ADU question, is that we are getting a lot of inquiries in the office from folks who are in smaller than AAA down to R3, who keep asking, oh, can I do an attached ADU over my garage that's existing and I live in residential A? So I think, maybe as part of that, we need to probably relook at that scenario, because we're not getting tons of requests from our AAA area, but we're getting a lot of requests in our residential A area.
well, that's not surprising. I mean, we all thought that, well, listen, let's take baby steps with this. And in that case too, we actually had in that regulation amendment, we decided to take baby steps with it. I mean, this is a policy thing where we can explore the basic idea for the whole Fairfield. So I
I've had a handful, I don't know, I would say a lot, but there have been a handful of applications that have been successful. One of the zoning board of appeals that got relief from the detached. But since the ADU is permitted, they got some relief to do it in a detached garage. I'd say maybe 5. I mean, we've had some inquiries
We've had
that
more than inquiries,
haven't
yeah.
gone. We've had plenty of inquiries that haven't led to any actual.
that's great. I mean, I think that's what the zoning board of appeals
They
is
tend to
for.
be older properties that have bigger detached garages. Okay.
Yeah,
Just a form question, and where it says housing progress on page 13, can we put in there the progress we've made by expanding our ADUs, also expanding our Counties Drive regulations to allow 12% engagement area, 12%, right?
it's 12,
I
yeah.
just think we should pat ourselves on the back when we get a chance. I mean, we're talking about the progress we've made there.
Right, we have, and we have also in separately
We talk about it. in the
talk about
settings.
ADU and in,
Progress since the last P O C D.
we talk
In the
about the
executive summary section, I
POD
think.
on page 17, but we don't say,
We talk about ADUs on page
so
2.
you want it specifically within the,
Like, it's progress that we've made in expanding
We have it here too.
housing, both the ADU expansion and the metro.
yeah, we kind of capture some of that in the POCD progress on page 2. But if you want to reemphasize that, I don't think that's.
Let's have it all in one place so we know where we are, what we've done so far. And also just another form thing on the page 19. I think they're stating the wrong page number when they're referring to figure 12. That's
sorry, where are
correct,
we?
very minor correction. I think what they mean is the next page over. Instead of page.
Oh, probably.
38.
Thank you.
And then I had another question. When we're converting from B to C, are we still, I don't see somewhere in here where we had it before where
Oh, no, that's okay. That is figure 13.
it's figure 12 is just part of this whole section, but we still have where we're going to allow, the C now allows quadplexes, right? Right now.
Up to 4 plexes.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Anyway,
Same thing. Yep, sorry.
At some point, we were going to reduce square footage of the parcel for a fourplex from 12,500 to 10,000 square feet. I don't know if that's still in here now.
It's in,
Sorry.
if you keep going, it's in. Where is
It's in the blue section.
it?
It's in the beginning of the blue section. So we're talking about New England Avenue area.
Yep.
And Grassmere area, and from B to C. That is so cramped up there. I mean, New England Avenue, some of those houses don't even have driveways. Everyone parks on the road.
Well, they have driveways, they just don't use them.
Oh, really?
So we're, yeah,
Well, I think that's too cramped to allow quadplexes on even smaller parcels. It's our, wait, that's a B zone right now, and that would convert to a C?
Yes.
Yeah, I think,
19, A5.
well, that may,
Well, I assume that's what you're talking about, right? Kathy, A5?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, figure 13, yeah.
It's on page,
I think we're gonna get
it's page 20.
feedback from people that live there. And, I mean, when I was out campaigning, people, even single family, you know, even in B zones down by the beach, they were complaining horribly about putting a duplex down there. So converting a B to a C would allow quad, that's a major change, it would allow triplexes allowed in B zones?
Yes.
No,
No.
B's caps out at
2 family. Yeah.
C, you can do a 2, 3, or
Triplexes are big.
Not necessarily. The unit sizes get smaller.
Buildings are pretty big, the ones I've seen, and then to allow a quadplex on a smaller parcel, it just seems like you're paving everything over, you're just adding so much impervious surface, there will be no blade of grass left, there will be nothing.
Usually the unit sizes get smaller. So, you know, if we're talking about, so in residential A, it's minimum 9,375 square feet. So that's like your classic beach neighborhood. We see mostly 3,600 square foot, single family homes. You could fit a fourplex within 3,600 square feet. So in terms of the massing, it's very similar.
this is also by close proximity to Metro. Metro. That's the key.
right, right.
Oh, huge. And then you have 4 families living there with 4 sets of cars, it's not like one family living in a big beach house, to me, it's different, it's more intensive.
You need 2,
Yeah, I
I
know.
live around the corner from Fox Street, and that's in an A zone. And when I moved in, I used to get a client divorced on Monday, and she'd walk by and my wife would say, "Who's that?" I'd say, "That's my client," because they all moved into the duplexes on Fox Street. And those have all changed to single family. But before that, that was an area which in an A zone was all duplexes, and we need, and that's a good thing to have there. So.
It's an order of magnitude different duplex and quadplex, that's what I'm saying. So you're converting
so
B to C zone, you're allowing quadplexes, and you're also reducing the parcel size. That's too much, I think. That's just,
And also add consider increase that we want, but
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Let Kathy, you done with your point? Because I want to go.
It's kind of like we're saying, this is what we want. And I also have a concern that I expressed last time we spoke in detail about the center of business district. I know that at one point there was a rendering of what buildings would look like if we allow the height by increasing the floor area ratio. And we were going to consider increasing floor area ratio to 3, but now it would be 2.5, but only Jim can tell us what that would allow, because it relates to 5 other factors and criteria. But my concern is that allowing 52-foot tall buildings side by side all the way down the Mill River is just too much. Like, it's one thing to expand the density and the height in the current footprint of the center business district, which ends just beyond Thorpe Street, beyond Starbucks. But it's another to add that added height, which would be allowed by increasing the floor area ratio allowed. Right now, they can't build the height they want. They could, that the zone allows, because we don't allow other factors that would allow that. So allowing the 52-foot tall buildings in the center of business district, I think last time we talked about this, we had a different commission then. We agreed there are 2 separate issues. One issue is densifying the current footprint of the center of business district. And the other issue is expanding that densified district all the way down Mill River, and whether it should go on the east side somewhere also. Right now, that ends before the Bob's Shopping Center, somewhere by Moe's Liquor, I think, or somewhere around there. So we started talking about that last time.
We did, and we scaled back from that discussion, the recommendation from FR to 3 to 2.5. And also included the concern that if we were going to have a building above a 3-story height, that it would have to come with it some architectural features at the 4th floor, or a combination, either set back that 4th floor or a combination of other design elements to break up that massing. That's where kind of we've settled, understanding that 52 feet is less than you can do now. Right now, you could do 5 stories.
Well, it's 50 feet now.
But it can't be done
5 stories, 50 feet.
5 stories.
because of floor area ratio requirement.
Well, it's multifold. It's still, even with 2.5, what you require for parking is still going to drive. I still believe that how much parking you can fit on a site, either structured or otherwise, is the largest constraining factor of overall size. 2.5, we live in 2 now. It's to promote, if we're talking about the opportunity of introducing different housing types, like you guys now at the 3 or 4-story level, you wouldn't be able to do it unless you move that needle a little bit from 2 to 2.5. We backed off.
Floor area ratio. No, I understand that, but the question
Backed off from 3 based on the discussion we had last time.
Well, just keep in mind one thing too. When we had that discussion, we were looking at the TOD recommendations specifically. I mean, what this is just saying is consider expanding. So we're not saying, we're not saying in this A3 to adopt the TOD recommendation. Was it TOD, right?
Well, I think this is spoken about on page 20 under strategy C, more so in terms of
Right.
the mass.
I see, I'm sorry, okay.
I think there's a lot more people that live in the neighborhood from Thorpe Street all the way to Mill River than there are in the other neighborhood, which is like where you'd be expanding the height and the density and all that in the current footprint of the business district. Behind it, you mostly have like commercial, little offices and things like that. You don't have people living going down all the way to Mill River. You have small little neighborhoods, and these are the people that came out about spot on. And I've heard a lot of really bad pushback about that other concept review we looked at on that where the cigar store is. Would this allow something like that concept review to go in there if we?
Well, that you guys had kind of, I thought, overall promising response to that pre-app that we did, concerned about some of the architectural stylistics of it. But one of the bonuses that particular developer may be introducing is to get to that higher percentage of residential, set a higher bar of percentage of affordability to go along with that. So again, I don't see this leading to wherever you settle, wholesale redevelopment of that entire stretch of the Post Road. It's just of the properties that are potentially ripe for redevelopment, like we had originally considered what's the best use for Exide. That seems to be a settled matter now in terms of it not being a mixed use project. But before that was announced, I think there was general consensus in all the public engagement we did that, yeah, mixed use commercial residential project makes sense at that location, just at what scale.
So again, so expanding this down there and changing our regulations to match it would allow that development, well, it's confusing because that had two zones. I don't know, expanding the center business district down there would eliminate the industrial zone or allow residential in the industrial zone.
Would not, no.
It would have allowed that project on Exide, right? More or less.
It would have allowed for mixed use.
It would have allowed for
We
mixed use.
changed the zone.
I don't think, but I think and I know Jeff, you're waiting, but let me just, let's just finish this topic. I thought we had said even if we expanded westward, we were going to exempt Exide, keep that industrial.
Did we say that?
No, we weren't gonna say anything specific.
Avoid 830G.
We weren't gonna say anything specific.
Well, I may have deferred it, but maybe that's it then, because I thought the concern was,
We're taking out Exide as the specific focus, and we were kind of making the conversation more expansive about wanting to expand the center design district because it brings with it all of the design criteria. Right now, the designed business district is our only commercial district without design standards that come with it, which is where you get drive-throughs, where you get all of these parking lots in front of the buildings.
We could change our regs to add design standards. We don't need to expand the center business district to do that, right? And
I guess my question is, if you've got a district that has all of that, why wouldn't you expand that district, disallow additional drive-throughs? Because right now you have design commercial district, which allows a certain menu of uses available to you. Just like an industrial district allows a certain menu of uses. Center design district restricts those a little bit, and then neighborhood design district restricts it down even further in terms of the number of uses allowed, and then with the envelope that use is allowed within, and its location on the lot itself. So I think right now, when you talk about walkability standards, center design has those walkability standards.
you could put those standards on this without allowing the same amount of density and height. And also without converting an industrial into something that allows residential, because that exposes it to 8-30G. Right now, you can't put an 8-30G on an industrial. They can't force you.
Can I provide the example of what happens if we leave it industrial? So we have a Porsche dealership coming there, and they want to have a 50-foot setback off of the road because the design industrial district allows that. Is that what we want in that neighborhood? Because we've left it because of fear, instead of progressively zoning for what we want, we may get a Porsche dealership that's 50 feet set off the road with a whole drive aisle and parking in front of it, because that's what that district allows.
We change our design standards without expanding the footprint of the center business district all the way to Mill River. I also have a great concern that
I guess we could, but the problem
The
is,
same as what you're doing.
Well,
It's
again,
the
you have
same
to
as what you already
go back.
have.
you still want to have zoning regulation amendments.
Oh,
You still don't want zoning amendments, that provide the incentive to do that. Now, you may just want to add the design standards to get it up front, but you're also gonna have to incentivize the people to move up front by maybe increasing height a little bit, getting the residential component in there. You know, just adding in the small things that you want. You may allow for it, but the question is, will it happen? And what's the current demand for it? And I think we've shown, at least in the center design district, that is the demand, I think, is more attractive than what we currently have. And
So I just want to direct it back to the previous page under A3.
what?
A3 on page am I on? 19. It talks about why we're considering that expansion. Again, this discussion of, we recognize that certain sections of downtown are very walkable and comfortable pedestrian environments and others are not. The idea here was to consider that expansion in either direction to a district that has proven design standards to support more walkable environment along this portion of the post road to complement the existing downtown. Expansion of this more walkable district to the east should also be considered. So in order to get that closer to the street, a little bit taller with some residential to promote that walkability, that's why that recommendation is coupled.
Does it have to be the same density as the center district? Could be a step down from that, for example, shorter building.
But
Well, I
guess
think the goal is to get three and 4 story. We're not going to get even downtown. We don't have a lot of 1 5-story.
That's because floor area ratio and other requirements restrict the ability to go as high as we allow them to go in our zoning regs.
I think that,
It all-
if we were to have this conversation with Mark here as well, as our economic development professional, what he would say is that land values are extremely high in Fairfield. And so we need to allow for regulations that allow developers to build. They are our partners in our grand list creation. They are our partners in providing us with commercial opportunities, restaurants and shops that we like to go to, for being able to pencil out projects that are mixed use, that provide that housing diversity that our residents have told us that they'd like at a walkable scale, with amenities that meet, I think, what we want in terms of Fairfield. And all of that comes with an envelope that can pencil out for them. I think that was largely part of the conversation that we heard from with Post Road Residential. I think we have to be.
Post road residential. Okay.
That's the one next to illicit. For example, when they talked about what could work, what can't work. And I think we have to understand that we can't just say, well, you can only do two story commercial along the post road. We're not going to see any redevelopment. We're not going to see any infill because that's not a viable envelope for a developer. I think we have to understand that if we want to balance the grand list a little better, which I think when we started the POCD process 5 years ago, that was, I think, a concern for our commissioners at that time, that the residential tax burden is really high and they really wanted to focus on thoughtful, intentional redevelopment and infill where we could to make Fairfield a little bit more vital in its downtown
I
area.
just don't want the Cannon effect where we have 52-foot tall buildings side by side all the way to Mill River.
But we
Eliminating
won't
sun
have that.
and, air and.
Yeah, I don't think
I
we'll have
don't think
that.
you'll see that result because
Yeah, I know. Jeff's been waiting.
So we've covered, since I had my initial comment, we've covered about 5 topics that you want to comment on. Which is helpful, but I guess one thing that concerns me is that we're talking about really small incremental things that we're going to get tangled in. So I think the notion, and you guys almost read my mind, when this document should say study. So Kathy, you're raising some issues about the height.
But we have done a study.
No. But I'm saying, but we had done a study, but I think everything in here should say studies, but one thing that's, well, so one specific thing that we've been batting around on, I guess 6A, says undertake a study. And I've marked up my language in here specifically. I'm not going to read it, but basically it says in all residential districts. So undertake a study and identify missing middle housing types permitted in all residential districts. So let's study what, and back to your point earlier, Emmeline, about 3,500 square foot house, that could be 4 units. Let's study the impact of that. There's a lot of concern, a lot of, I think, misimpressions that it's going to, be negatively impactful. But I hang on to Jim's number of $7,500 per unit in tax revenue. That's something we have to keep sight on. Increasing density will increase the grand list and reduce the overall tax burden without taxing the infrastructure of this town. And we have to look at how different housing types, and I'm focused on A6 here, in all residential districts, which can solve our missing middle problem. And I've got the language in here if you guys want to read it again. I know you guys did, but we need to study how housing types can positively affect the community without undue burdening it. So we talked about housing types a little
Let me
bit.
just push back on one thing you said. I wouldn't say study in here the route, because I don't want to give the impression that that in order to affect change and stuff, that we need to undertake a study every single time. I think consider is the better word.
Consider's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind undertake study
Yeah.
in the cases I've seen it. I just want to.
Consider is fine, but basically that would help us build consensus, understand the impact, address a lot of the questions that some of the commissioners are raising now on, well, what about parking? What about this? What about that? But consider, I'm perfectly in line with that. So consider, so specifically housing types, and a lot of the feedback I'm hearing now is, well, I don't want skyscrapers. Nobody wants skyscrapers, but one thing that I put in my comments is form-based code. I am a strong advocate of that. That will allow the community to get to a consensus over what we want the community to look like. There's form-based code will, I think, offer the potential solution on height, on appearance, on walkability, on retail at the base level, and on parking.
Could you explain form-based code?
So form-based code basically says FORM, not foreign, FORM.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that's where I got thrown off. I thought you said form.
Form. Yeah. So do you know what that is?
Form, I
Anyway, let's go through
Yeah,
it.
so form-based code basically says how high a building is, what the general appearance will be, what the use is, what the parking ratio is. It says, and Wilton just implemented this for downtown. Hartford has it. Emmeline's an expert on it, I'm sure.
Not so much.
Yeah, but
For certain zones? Or the
for
entire-
certain zones,
Okay.
it's usually commercial zones. It says that downtown should look like this,
Okay.
right?
Well,
It's
yeah.
right.
Fit the form.
Fit the form, but it also specifies use. And back to, will it pencil out? I'm a developer. If we do something without collaborating with the development community, it's dead on arrival, totally dead on arrival. So I think looking at form-based code, and I cite in here that and I know this is gonna create some negative reaction, but New Rochelle, that have skyscrapers, specifically worked with the development community to figure out what the master plan was and effectively pre-approved building types. So then if the developer wanted to build something, there was consensus beforehand, and it was effectively an over-the-counter approval. Everything was pre-done. They zoned the downtown. We don't want our downtown to look like New Rochelle. That's not what I'm suggesting. But if we can collectively form a vision on what our commercial districts look like, so we don't have drive-throughs, we know what we want, we know what we don't want, and reach a consensus as a commission with the guidance of our excellent staff. But it costs money. This costs money.
It's very expensive.
And that's why we need to partner with developers who may do it on spec. There's some other ways to do it that where we solicit some proposals. There's some ways around to make it a partnership, but I'm a strong advocate, and I will continue to be as long as I'm in this commission, for form-based code, because it addresses just about every question you ask, Kathy. And it allows us,
Yeah, I have problems with not having public hearings, but that's a separate issue.
but it's consider. This is all in the category of consider. Okay? We're not doing something in the dark. We're considering it and we're proposing it. So another thing that's related to that we haven't really talked about, we've talked about different housing types. We've talked about what the downtown looks like, is parking minimums. That's something that
What? I'm sorry.
parking minimums. This is where the left and the right converge. Parking minimums are a taking in my book. You're dictating to a landowner how they should be using their land, which may not align with their economic interests. We should look at parking minimums and evaluate them and see where we can get rid of it. We've got way more parking in our areas than anybody ever uses. I see mostly empty asphalt at the train station, at Bob's, you know, you can picture the places. There's ample parking in this town, and we haven't even gone vertical. We've got, I think, one parking garage I can think of, but we need to holistically evaluate.
So we talk about that in strategy F, and then we also talk about it in the sustainable Fairfield, sustainably prosperous Fairfield section, where we talk about equalizing the parking ratios in strategy B3.
I'm all for eliminating, but that's
I know.
me.
I just don't know if we're there yet.
No, we're not there yet, but
Yeah.
consider is the operative word.
Yep.
I'll say progressive and innovative parking strategies. Because if we incrementally change, we're never going to get there.
Yeah, I think downtown, we see parking issues. Certainly Bob, I mean, even when Bob's was in operation, wide open most of the time. What is not, what we used to be Kohl's. But I mean, downtown, there's not issues with parking, but it's not like as easy. It was the consultant who said the residential component, parking minimums, especially for
Yeah.
3-4 units was like
Yep.
ripe for,
It's way high.
yeah, right, that was ripe.
Yep.
And I mean, again, what you said is, I think, important for big box stores. Downtown, we need to be mindful of because I think a lot of people have issues with parking. And I don't think it's unwarranted. Maybe you're walking longer than you normally would like.
People don't want to walk.
It's
Yeah, but you're there, right? I mean,
Gonna walk in, they don't want to park at Bob's.
It's a big planner's debate. The planner will say, if it's worth going to, you will walk 2 blocks. And then it creates pedestrian traffic. It takes more cars off the road.
yeah, 2 blocks isn't, terrible down there.
And we have a big train station, and I think
Yeah.
one of the plans said put a tunnel through so you can use the train station parking, right?
Yeah.
I saw that somewhere. Right?
There's a lot going on with parking. I will agree that certainly for retail centers, above a certain square footage, you don't need to keep adding incremental parking. At some point, it becomes a diminishing return. There are some, it's usually major urban environments, and Hartford is one, where they've eliminated all their requirements for parking. Just let the developer figure it out, because it's in their interest to make sure their tenants and customers can park. But at the same time, Hartford has the greatest amount of its downtown acreage devoted to surface parking than any other city in the country. So that was kind of what led to it. Downtown's a different animal. And you bring 100 people into the room and ask them individually if they think there's enough parking downtown, you're going to get probably at least 85 different opinions out of that 100. I can't park right in front of the restaurant I want to go to, but yeah, you could park around the corner or at Sherman Green or some other reasonable walking distance, and it behaves like a downtown, and it works well downtown. It doesn't work so well up in Black Rock Turnpike. We don't have that critical mass that creates that walkable environment. So we agree that I think there's ways to reduce how much parking we're demanding at certain scales. But I don't think we're quite at the point where we should say no minimum, but I think reducing certain minimums is an absolute.
I think the developers are going to optimize the use of their land and, as you say, figure it out. And it will possibly lead to, you look at Greenwich, you've got parking garages. Greenwich is just marginally denser than we are, and figure it out. We go to downtown Greenwich. For some reason, we're still in that hybrid between a partial strip retail and a downtown. We're that in between. But that's what I'm suggesting, form-based code, where we look at the downtown holistically and try to at least create a vision for it for the next generation.
Well, I agree, and that's why, and not necessarily completely form-based code, but some hybrid thereof potentially, but that's the thrust of why the recommendation is presented to potentially consider expansion of the commercial district so we can expand that feel of the downtown. So those areas feel a little bit more comfortable, and you might be incented to walk more than you would today.
Yeah, and the reason I'm saying form-based code is because Kathy raises a lot of questions, which are good questions, my suggestion is we try to address those questions up front and get agreement on many of those topics with developers who are going to be putting their equity and debt into these improvements and tell us whether they actually work.
So for example, Cleban, their development is all 2 stories, but don't they have residential on top of commercial?
What are we talking about now? The brick
Just the
wall?
Cleban as an example, all their development downtown.
Ranges.
There's a lot, there's a lot of their properties, but there are a handful of apartments within the brick. It's relatively new. There's not a ton. There's maybe,
People actually live there?
Yes.
Have you seen anyone?
for example, there's 4 apartments in the Joseph A. Bank building.
Oh,
It's not a big number.
like you don't have to have 52-foot tall building to have mixed use. That's how are they able to do it? Why do we have to make it look like a mini city in order to attract that? If they're able to do it, I don't know. I'm not a
They're
developer.
converting their existing non-viable office space on the second floor to apartments.
They added
If
on.
somebody's going to build something brand new, they've been a landowner for a long period of time, right? So, they're not somebody who's just starting off doing construction today from the ground up. So it's a different fiscal analysis.
They also, the brick walk is kind of a critical mass type of site in which it's a bunch of parcels that are viewed collectively from the design requirement standards. There may be individual parcels there, but their parking is spread over the entire campus, if you will, as is their square footage. And they've got such a big footprint, they can achieve that scale. Excuse me.
With shared parking and
Tom and then Alexis.
So quickly, very strongly supportive of form-based code and reducing parking minimums. On D1, increase the supply of affordable housing as the header for that strategy. Currently says study increasing the affordability set aside requirements to 15% in all zoning districts, which I think makes sense. But I also think, generally speaking, this commission wants to maximize the affordability of new development to the extent possible. So I would love to see, if we're doing a study, looking into where we may be able to increase the set aside requirement to 20% in key districts through, I shouldn't say required, where we would increase it to 20% in key districts through incentives, which may be density bonuses, may be other things to be explored through this study that we're already proposing.
Just a quick question on that. On C6, the inclusionary zoning are 12% or more. Then we have 15%.
This one study, that one is, I think, saying we should just do it and then study.
Because that's in the TOD section. So strategy C all speaks to the TOD study that we completed and implementing the recommendations within that study.
Still at 10%.
would that just be the Metro Center TOD or the downtown TOD?
Well, I think that the section on Metro was a much more significant section, although I think it spoke to increasing the affordability from a range from 12 to 15% within that plan. I mean, I will say that, I think that Mark Barnhart has been speaking to a lot of developers about the increased affordability. And they tend to agree with you that they kind of, it's borderline in terms of whether they can make the numbers work. So I think Mark has been trying to figure out whether or not there are funding support that's available out there to help them with pre-development costs or something that would help them get to that 20% on the back end. We're a little uncertain right now.
Right, so that's what I'm getting at, and I think the distinction would be the 20% would be optional, but through some, a set of mechanisms.
And 20 is option, yeah.
Where are we now? Some are 10 and some are 12?
Correct.
I mean, that's very low compared to our neighbor Westport, and they're much higher.
Westport's at 20 or 18?
I think they're 50.
I
Well,
don't know.
two schools of thought there. You need to ask yourself, that's what the regulation may say, but how many units have been created under that metric? Or is that really setting a high bar in the hope that the units won't come? That's just
Is it a
a
disincentive?
cynical way of looking at it.
So more-
If you set the percentage so high that no one will ever do it, it looks good that you're saying your regulation says you demand a high percentage, but yet it yields no.
But there's a balance, right?
20% of nothing.
Okay.
Go ahead, Alexis.
Yeah, I think I just, and I'm not sure this is in the right spot, but I just wanted to just go back to the seniors. I just had some notes.
That was that page earlier on. in
Yeah,
the-
but it's actually, I don't know if this would be a home for all in that title that we were still with, but is there any way to facilitate some, regulations, education where we can promote more age-friendly housing options, near walkable, pedestrian-friendly areas? Maybe have regulations for more assisted living facilities, things like that. So we do have I think we do have a need for folks who are older and there's just no place to go.
We allow assisted living in all of our residential zones and in our commercial districts. So it's really just, usually those tend to be bigger development sites. And so we may just be running out of those parcels, to be honest. But I will say that what we hear from developers is that they don't really want to do age-restricted development. They find that a lot of it just, they find that it's, they find that a lot of the folks who end up there are
It's
singles.
going to curb. But
It's gonna curve by itself to be a little bit trending older. But they don't want to close the door to like younger folks who end up being single person households through divorce or whatever.
one of the things where
I think we're on page 13 to 14. Which is where that section was.
we're talked about, but one of the
But I don't think.
one of the strategies that we're including, we're jumping ahead a little bit, page 22. Where we talk about review the design residence districts to identify the extent to which some of these recommendations occur. The design residence district is an overlay zone. It was created to allow garden apartments and condominiums. It's the zone that allowed stuff like Southwood Woods to be built, Village, and all the major condominium developments. In the late 80s, it was a popular form of development, and there was a lot of pushback from neighborhood groups at that time. Hey, we're swinging we should be a primarily single family community. Stop building all of these multifamily condominium developments. And the regulations were drastically changed in the late 80s to reduce the permitted density that zone permits. And as a result, it effectively
Killed all the developments.
killed off the condo product, if you will. What we're suggesting here is maybe it's time to revisit what that regulation used to permit, because it's a greater density than you can do now, but less dense than what like an 8-30G would be, to give a developer an option to do something more, but not, and have the right amount. Because that's the DRD is what the design residence district is, the mechanism that was tweaked for a downtown density to allow acreage to be built. And that resulted in, while it's not age restricted, I would say, I could ask if they have the numbers, but there's a fair percentage of seniors defined now as age restricted as 55 and over is what the state definition is. So I think a fair percentage would
What's the logic behind that? 16 years school, not to generate school kids?
No,
Well, it's what
right?
I think. That's historically, I think, yes, that folks that wanted to promote age restricted development was that, okay, that's not going to bring with it the budget demands that other types of housing would. But even unrestricted, what we have found in our analysis of enrollment, and not that is that those types, because of their price points, they don't generally get that number. If you can afford the product at that price point, you've got other options available to you than a multifamily condo type situation. And that's not going to be your first choice if you've got school age kid. Now, it might be for some, and it is, but I just know my wife and I lived in a condo townhouse in Stratford and we had our first child, we're like, "Ooh, we need to get out of here." You know, and we did. But I think over all of these recommendations, anytime we're talking about different housing types, including potentially allowing a greater percentage of residential in a mixed-use development, those might be occupied by somebody that might want to downsize.
More attainable than, I would say, in Anchorage. I think that price point is a bit
That rental price point is very high.
not attainable probably for most seniors, or a lot of seniors.
Right, but that's why you need to, if we're going to increase the density under the DRD overlay, now with our inclusionary provision, there would have to be some percentage, and maybe 15% is the right number, whatever the number is, that there would have to be built into that also a affordability component.
I think the other thing too is like, when we see developers want to build, it's because there's demand. And there's demand because people need that style of a home. And so I think that's what we're trying to respond to is that, you know, when we get calls in the office, well, you know, are there going to be any condos built? Like, you know, we're hearing these pressures of what people need. We're hearing these pressures from developers who are looking to build different types of things that our regulations don't presently allow. So there's definitely demand, both in terms of people who want to live there and people who want to build it.
Do we have any condos that have an affordable deed restriction now? Because that same ownership issue is going to come up.
We haven't, I don't believe there has been an ownership type.
Westway, right? And that was a unique situation.
That's for sure.
That's not translatable.
That's right.
So we-
Aside from Westway, there hasn't been an owner a for sale product that has been developed since the design residence district opportunity has been so drastically reduced. So what we're suggesting,
Reef Road ones.
if we-
The Reef Roads ones will be for sale. One of the first 9-unit building.
Building up, right?
They didn't build enough. They had to pay the fee,
Right.
but they didn't have to
but
provide.
that's a 9-unit, that's not a DRD, that was a
Yeah.
variance situation. To give you an order of magnitude, the design residence district under the old regime allowed, depending on your lot size, about between 12 and 15 units per acre. So it's if you have an acre, it's 9,375 square feet for the first unit and then 3,000 square feet required for every unit thereafter. So it would be a zone that would permit, depending on where it is, some types, some of these townhouses or cottage cluster or any other, call it what you will. If it's a smaller site, what the regulations did is it increased the minimum lot size that's for eligibility to the point where there aren't really any parcels available at the densities that we allow to be done. So if you have a smaller lot and allow a greater density, you might be able to do a 4, 5, or 6 unit development that and have some kind of component in there. So
Just a question. So I think, well, my view is gentle density is a more incremental change and it's a more palatable change. These complexes tend to be not gentle density. They're kind of all in one.
Mhm.
So, and I've been through this document many times. How do we best, I would like to see gentle density encouraged, and that's an incremental increase in housing, townhouses, smaller. How do we, is that addressed in this document sufficiently right now in your minds?
Well, it goes back to that last back and forth we were talking about at
From the B to the C.
at
and
A6, talking about, undertake a study of identifying middle housing types where they might be permitted potentially in all districts. So that's a pretty broad statement. There's some other more discrete recommendations that I think could qualify as gentle density that are in here. But so it's a mix. There's some that's, hey, let's study the bigger picture and we'll do this. Some thoughts are, okay, if you allow a permitted FAR lot, doesn't really make any difference how many units there are within that FAR. I know that's
Put it to a vote.
well, that's one way of looking at it. But that also comes with proper parking and which, and like that. But there's also smaller scale recommendations in here in more discrete locations that would result in some of that. In the design residence district opportunity that I was discussing,
Yes.
I don't think, I agree, I wouldn't necessarily put that under the heading of gentle density, but in terms of a way to promote a product where that would meet the demand of downsizing seniors, perhaps, where there's not a lot of for sale product. There's a lot of rental product out there. But there's not a lot of for sale product. If somebody that has a big house, they want to sell it and then could afford to take a smaller townhouse type development.
One of the consistent concerns we hear, I've heard from other commissioners, I hear all the time, and I'm sure you do, is basically too much of a change. So is gentle density is an incremental change. If you were to permit multifamily across the whole town, I know that wouldn't ever happen. If you did, that would occur very slowly and incrementally. Studying, I'd like to, I put some specifics in here about basically allowing, encouraging ADUs. We haven't really gotten to that specifically, but encouraging ADUs, which are gentle density in my mind, allowing and some small tweaking the ADUs effectively pushes you to the point of having a two-family house effectively. So I put some specific suggestions in there around ADUs, eliminate the owner occupied requirement, and basically allow a freestanding ADU in any zone, as long as it complies with the residential setbacks. How do we, get that into the consideration? I know that this is just a policy document for guidance, but do we have to reach a consensus as a group that has to go in? How do we?
You should discuss it amongst yourselves.
I mean, I think.
This tangent right now.
Yeah.
In my paper here, basically, I suggested ADUs. Right now, great, we have ADUs, but they're very restrictive, and it sounds like I talked to Matt, we have that many applications for ADUs. We haven't gotten that
I think
many.
we get about 10 to 12 a year.
Yeah.
Most are,
Construction's expensive, right?
they're not cheap in the fact of the matter is most folks want them. They generally don't want to be a landlord to people that built them. People who built them so far.
Yes.
Well, no, it's just people, anybody that wants to consider it, it's generally, hey, I want a spot for, my son that's graduating from college and I want a little space, or I want to have my mother-in-law move in with us, but have some separation of space to accommodate family situations. It is a tool for folks that may not be able to otherwise afford the house if they didn't have a rental. So that's another opportunity. But anecdotally, I think most people are using them for family situations. It's not restricted. You can rent.
But nationally, that's not necessarily the case. If you look at California, ADUs are used as an alternate source of income.
Oh, absolutely.
There's so much-
In super expensive housing markets, if you couldn't otherwise afford your house without that additional rental stream, that's a good marriage. And that's possible here too. You can certainly rent it if you choose to.
We're just not seeing that happen a lot of
But-
times.
Being a residential landlord is quite a.
What they want.
They could, yes, there's no restriction.
It can
You
absolutely.
can definitely rent it out
So,
now.
so that's really the genesis of why the accessory apartment regs were adopted in the first place the original thrust was to help empty nesters that might otherwise sell and leave town. Hey, help them stay in their house by either downsizing into that ADU or creating that rental income to help them maintain the house. So that's baked in, that's there, you can do it. What you're suggesting is eliminating the owner occupancy piece.
Setbacks.
So,
And set, because the setback requirements are onerous.
well, for detached, it's the same as a primary structure.
Right.
So if we were to do this in the residential A zone, obviously we would have to look at different standards because you really couldn't fit, if we're kind of taking the scenario of folks who have come in to ask us this question, we are getting the question from folks who want to put it over an existing garage.
Right.
And in the residential A zone, that's where, as a commission, you guys would have to discuss, do you feel comfortable with that 4 foot off the rear yard, 4 foot off the side yard setback scenario where we haven't applied that in the other districts? But I think, the folks who are coming in, they're comfortable with it because they're asking the question. It's just, a larger discussion as to, is it really that much of a change between, the garage on the ground floor and is there that much more impact having a small unit above it? What I will say is that, we do have that proportionality. I think ADUs are always intended to be accessory in size, from a rhythm and scale of a neighborhood. That single family home is still the primary feature when you've got the look and the feel of a street in a neighborhood. That's still the primary feature. And that ADU is a subsidiary structure, right? It's either in the back, on the side. It's not the primary focus of what you see on the street.
Can I ask a clarifying? You want to take away the setbacks to do this? You're saying, but
I'm right now, we've got a housing problem. And the housing problem is for people who are looking at smaller units. In an ADU, we already have a rule that allows ADUs, but the ADU rule is restrictive. I can't I'm on an acre and a quarter in Sickle.
You're an R2.
R2. I'm an R2. I can't put it as freestanding unless I go get a variance.
right.
I
Okay.
can't do an over the counter. So I'm discouraged from doing that. It's a process. Removing the restrictions it will increase the supply of housing and provided, and this is a big proviso, that it complies with the existing setback rules. So here's an extreme example. You're at Greenfield Hill. You're in a 7,000 square foot house. You don't even see your neighbors. Is your neighbor ever going to know if you've got 2 people living in that house? I doubt it. I doubt it. So that's an extreme example, but if we were to allow ADUs in more places above a garage in Seattle, right? Seattle, they were always above a garage, right? They were, and they were super expensive housing market. We're not, I'm sure somebody took exception to saying, well, we're not a super expensive housing market. We're expensive, but we're not West Coast yet. We're on the way to being there. We need to, I think, be a little bit more creative in terms of allowing gentle density that would permit additional housing unit types that would comply with existing lot coverage, setbacks, et cetera. So it doesn't look any different, but you now have 2 people living, in my extreme example, in a Greenfield Hill house.
Right. I got you.
So
I think the idea of consider expanding ADUs is the way to go. I'm not sure we need the specifics that you have in your comments. But I think that the whole idea.
We can get to that in the reg discussion.
Yeah.
So we need to close the chapter on this so we get to the regs.
Oh, yeah, but I mean,
Saying that.
people taking that ADUs as part of gentle density.
Yeah.
And as we've been saying, consider and be broad to some extent. We don't need to necessarily
this
have.
is the Los Angeles regulation I copied.
But yeah, I think having that as a priority, identifying it doesn't bother me unless it bothers.
Jeff, are you suggesting that we get rid of the setback for ADUs? I'm not clear.
So right now, there's for freestanding ADU, it's got to have the same setback as a.
As the main house.
Primary house.
You're saying you want to get rid of that?
Yeah, so put it above, allow an ADU to go above the garage. So
Okay.
there.
But can I ask without going above the garage?
I'm just envisioning a house in front of a house, like a mini house in front of a house, like when you say get rid of the setbacks.
So what we will say is that the zoning regulations in the AA and the AAA zones, if you have an accessory structure that's larger than 100 square feet, which more than likely an ADU would be, that was already there. you had to meet the primary setback requirements anyway. So we didn't change that setback when we allowed for ADUs. It was the same. So we didn't kind of distinguish between a garage and an ADU in those larger lot zones. I think if we go to those smaller lot zones, we are going to have to, just based on the nature of the lot and the constraints.
So an accessory structure setback, if you want to build a detached garage in an A zone, for example, you have the same minimum street line setback as the house, but the side yard, you can be closer to your side and rear property.
Okay.
And so what Jeff is suggesting, and what Emily just said, if we're going to allow a detached unit on a smaller lot, they're not going to be able to achieve that greater rear yard setback or side yard setback, but it would still have to have the requisite street line setback.
Understood. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
And I think
Again, those are details we can discuss in regulation amendments.
Yes,
The idea is in the policy.
Right,
Right.
that's the distinction between, in to capture the thought, and it helps to spell out what you're thinking. But this document is the goal and strategy recommendation, and then the actual implementation of that would be in the next phase of whatever structural changes.
Include that because I copied the California.
No, that's fine. I mean, but yeah, Janine, go ahead.
Well, I guess I have a question about the process that we're going through right now, and I'm really enjoying this very fruitful discussion, but I'm just thinking about how we keep like zooming out and then zooming in, zooming out, zooming in.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, you keep saying about getting to the regulations, I'm like, when do we get to that? Because I can't help but think that so much of that conversation will then force us to zoom back out and talk about like the bigger picture principles and.
There are three pieces to the work we are undertaking with our consultant. One is to rewrite POCD. They've undertaken phase one, regulation rewrite, by drafting that we distributed to us a while ago. We've kind of put that on the back burner because this is what's seen as the priority. So there's a draft out there of taking our existing regulations and restructuring them, reordering them, putting them in more modern best practice outline for robust definitions, diagrams, not significantly changing the regulations as they are, but restructuring them into more user-friendly, modern document. The last piece is once we've adopted this document that makes specific recommendations on what to do, the next strategy then is, okay, what substantive changes are there to make in the regulations as the next?
Okay. So whatever we decide here.
These
is
are
then
recommendations.
Going to, right, okay.
The regulations are the rules of the
Impact
road.
that draft that's been.
Right. This is going to inform the next phase of the regulation piece, is to where are the priorities that you've identified here that we want to implement in the regulation.
The regulations, okay.
Now, that doesn't mean it commits us to amending the regulations, but it also says if we use the ADU as an example, half of us may be thinking along Jeff's line, and half of us may be thinking, well, I just want to expand it in one instance.
Okay.
And the idea of consider expanding ADUs kind of encompasses
Yes.
the idea. Now, once we get past that, and after we, get past the form regulation stuff, adjusting that, what are we going to actually do with consider adjusting the ADU regulations?
Okay. And so our decision right now is to think about just like.
We should be thinking policy, generalities. I say generalities, but there are some specifics in here as well.
Right.
But I think predominantly more of a policy thing, or policy considerations. There are going to be times where you see specifics in there which can be adjusted or added. I think general goal is policy, and then there are going to be some sections to that, but that's the idea.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Alexis and
Just to finish the ADU conversation, and Jeff, my question isn't indicating how I feel either way. I think it's acting great stuff, and I think it's something we should really consider. Are you thinking, and I would defer to you guys too, like, could we expand that to other areas of town where we don't currently permit it? Like the beach area, for example?
Sure, that's entirely up
We could have
to
that
you.
conversation.
Right now, one of the strategies is to consider expanding the detached ADU opportunity, because because as Chair mentioned, when went to detach, the idea was, okay, let's roll this out incrementally. And if people are comfortable with expanding that opportunity to other districts, that's one thing. And one of the biggest hurdles that was taken away in the last revision was you weren't even allowed to put an addition on your house to accommodate it. It had to be within the confines of the existing structure. That prohibition is gone. You can do additions. Do that too. The question of whether or not you want to expand them, it's allowed in every district now, except that that's something you think.
Well, no, it's just something maybe we could revisit potentially, but I know you've talked
Absolutely.
about the valid reasons why we currently don't do it.
I mean, if you're talking about in general expanding that opportunity, all of those things I think would,
Right?
all of those things would come into the discussion. You know, the beach district is a unique environment. There already are a lot of properties that have multiple housing units on them, and a host of other things. but
Create another bigger issue that we don't want to create.
Really crowded, you're looking,
Yeah.
it will all be students. Let's just put it out there.
If you were opening up that opportunity, yeah, it warrants considering whether you want to.
And two things, just on the ADU, I don't think detached are allowed in A.
They're
Not
not,
presently,
no.
only R3 and up, so half acre and up.
Yeah, so that might be expanding the detached to A.
Yeah.
And then for one just totally out of left field, as we're sitting here, we're talking about expanding, sort of middle housing. I remember the presentation we had a few years ago from, I guess, the Commission on the Elderly or whatever, where they were talking about sort of, courtyard or cottage style housing. And I don't know any developer that's going to be putting that into, any developer that's going to put their own money into that sort of housing, which is ideal for a senior community. It's low density, low impact, and promotes harmony among neighbors.
So like cluster housing?
Like clusters.
Yes, okay.
Nobody's building it. So it might be that we need to focus on promoting municipal or governmental funds to provide for affordable courtyard cottage, low density housing.
That's
I don't know that that's in here
well,
anywhere.
it's not in here. It's a strategy in the town's affordable housing plan is to be more, to partner more with like an organization like the Housing Authority, to put more resources towards that type of development for their opportunity. Because you're right. I think they're the candidate to do something like that. And that's one of the strategies in the affordable housing plan to try to increase that potential opportunity.
So then maybe we need to focus on allowing regulations amended to allow that to happen.
Well, the increased opportunity of the design residence district that's referred to here would be probably the vehicle that would get to the density if you could achieve that. It does, so that's,
On Stratfield Road, what's that, development that's back there? Woodway?
Here?
No.
Woodfield Village?
Is it Woodfield Village, the condos or, okay.
Backs up to Owen Fish?
Yes.
Well, there's a Strathmore. There's a bunch of them on Strathmore. You got Dogwood Green at the four corners, and you have Strathmore as you go north.
No, farther north.
On the left is Woodfield Village.
What's the last condo built?
It is a condominium.
It's a design residence district.
Design
It
residence.
was developed under the old
Last condo built, right?
I
reg.
don't know if it's the last one.
I think it was like the last condo complex built in.
Or which is the one right by the nursing home up there?
Strathmore.
There's one right between the Merritt and it's supposed to started out over 55.
Oh, like the suburbs that area?
For the merit?
Suburbs.
We're talking generally across the street from the old GE campus.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a condo.
That's a condo under DRD.
That one is Suburbs.
It's,
There's a sign at the street.
Jim, come on. That was originally developed as a
55, wasn't it?
age restricted because there's a density bonus in the DRD for age restricted.
They're not cheap. There's another one.
That one and the one I just mentioned are DRD.
So
Down right by.
Told me it was like affordable housing way back when. I was like,
No.
that's true.
Woodfield Village, the history of Woodfield Village, it was actually an orphanage.
Really?
It was, there are a couple old buildings in there, the brick buildings. It was an orphanage. An orphanage back in the day.
You're at least 650.
Developed in the mid-80s where it expanded under the DRD, there's probably 100 and, I have a list. I don't know.
Village still.
It's okay, I'm sorry to
It's a big complex.
write all this, I just,
Still.
we were talking about it, it was driving me crazy.
Take over, no, the actual Woodville Village was there.
Oh, I
Ice
see.
creams.
Maybe it was a separate entity.
Yeah.
No, it's very nice. You're talking Woodfield Village.
Bridgeport.
Very nice.
It's run by another agency. It's consumed.
I don't think they call them orphanage.
Who live there say that it was a home for, well, people who live there say it was a home for unwed mother.
When you're homeless.
Well, it was a mix of things. It was,
You could go there.
I mean, there was an original building, it was there, but then all these townhouses. Dogwood Green, Strathmore, Stratfield Falls
Redfield Falls.
is, again, all developed under the DRD
Okay,
regime.
Really said.
sorry for that, but that's.
Right.
Before you get to the.
So I think, I got
I think we covered mostly everything.
page 22.
Yeah, I think we covered mostly everything within page 22. I think the only thing left was that we do need to kind of, within our zoning regulations, make them compliant with state statute, but we did mention reducing the density within the FEMA floodway, also reducing the parking requirements. And I think we covered everything else through conversation. So I guess we can, I don't know what time it is. Do we want to,
So I mean,
so we want to do the next chapter starting on the next meeting?
I would think so, is that my?
Everybody's.
Yeah, I'm good.
Question.
What do we do with the chapter we just did? Are we supposed to reach consensus? Are we making more changes? Are we submitting more input?
I think at this point, based on the conversation we had, if there's comments, if there are suggested edits, I guess, comments, based on what we've said, we've already had some comments to be made and some edits, I think, potentially. I think we should, I think they address, but we should also draft what we want, even if we've discussed it. So that either it's a running record for ourselves. I don't think you necessarily have to send them all in tomorrow. At least start in your own respects, having a working draft for yourself as to what you want to see in the draft. I don't think it needs to be submitted yet, but it's for ourselves. So we'll meet again next week, I think. Are we doing that next week?
Yeah, we've carved out next Tuesday because there's an extra Tuesday a month.
No, I think we
To
should.
continue this discussion.
Anyway, but I mean, let's keep doing what we're doing as far as having staff go through what the edits are. This is a great conversation. Like keep a Word document or a working document for yourselves of edits and stuff so that when we get to the point of making further edits, we can either submit them or however the case is, but at least then we have something to work off of. Table of contents.
One table of contents issue, I looked at a number of other towns, POCD, and I think it was the state requirement, but the implementation summary, I don't think we have, it seems to not be.
It's not in the contents. We started kind of fleshing out
That's a to be added.
at the very end, appendix
At the
B.
very end, but obviously until we.
But
It's appendix B as it would be in the table of contents, but it's not.
it's intentionally not there yet.
No,
Well-
it's not going to be appendix B. It's going to be, it'll be a last item underneath appendix B.
Right.
Yeah.
Appendix B is like the skeleton of a action item.
No, appendix B is for the resiliency portion.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Bill says appendix B.
Oh, sorry.
All right. No, you're right.
You guys look at my comments on that?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Thanks.
We started, it's not in the table of contents, but it's the last 2 pages of the document. There's a very skeleton start.
Because I'm having worked in large corporations and done a lot of consulting work. Unless we have an implementation plan, this is going to be a shelf ornament, unless we have a specific accountability, who's.
That's why we were doing the regs. That's why we were doing the regs.
But it's also, this is also a matrix responsibility. There's the housing authority, there's the different conservation groups. There's a matrix the first selectman's office is going to be responsible for some of this as a lead. So
There's a very skeleton beginning of that on the very last page.
We can't flesh it out until we're in
there
agreement.
you go. Okay.
Yes.
It'd be like a roles and
Excellent.
responsibilities type of thing.
Kind of. I don't know if anybody's read our hazard mitigation plan that's part of MetroCog's larger, but there's an implementation table at the end. And every year we come before the Board of Selectmen to kind of review that with them. And that has kind of an action table that talks about, is this a short-term, long-term, goal and what's the progress? So I think it can be structured similarly.
For all those, you guys are really,
Thank you.
This is
Very
good.
Well, we enjoy the conversation and we appreciate your.
I hope you guys know that.
No, I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Just want to move to
The fun stuff.
You want to get to the action.
Before place 27.
This up, we can do this all. So next Tuesday, 6, there's no agenda other than this discussion.
We're here.
Put on your bill.
6:30.
6:30 a week from today. We'll send out, it's listed as a special meeting, but
Public meeting, special meeting, so we'll have this.
for the sake of continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Close the hearing.
I appreciate the time.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm sorry, who's our special guest tonight?
something else I can help with?
An interested citizen.
An interested citizen?
I thought of you before we could.
60,000.
On yours, I said.
I love that.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.
Do we have anything else? Yeah.
I have.
Take it easy, Tommy.
All right, good night all.
Yeah. All right.